Chapter 8:10. In a trance, everyone had an illusion, as if there was a dirty train roaring past their ears. They really didn't know where the other party found so many poems with so many connotations. Or were the ancients also experienced in terms of sex? Shameless ji chin, crooked. Are you talking about demons and spirits? There's an experienced driver here, the situation is already out of control. The audience in the streaming room cheered for Wei Ci. They were curious about how such an ancient gentleman, who stood tall like an orchid and smiled like the bright moon in one's arms, would look like when he wrote erotic stories. They were so curious that they couldn't wait to encourage Jiang Pengji to read it now. They would definitely catch up. As the saying goes, amateurs watch the show, while experts see the artistry. Jiang Pengji could see the deeper meaning behind Wei Ci's move. In her opinion, simple and clear vernacular was an important part of opening the people's wisdom. She didn't expect Wei Ci to bring it up in such a form. That's good. I'm afraid it's been hard on you these days. She smiled and gave affirmation. Fulfilling one's duty is the duty of an official. There's nothing hard about it. Wei Ci still maintained a humble attitude, but he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. In the eyes of others, such vernacular novels were no different from saliva, but wasn't it also one of the channels for spreading words? The people couldn't understand it, let alone remember those awkward sentences. The simpler and more straightforward it was, the more it could be accepted by the people at the bottom. Everything had to be done step by step, steadily and surely. This was even more so when it came to opening the people's wisdom. Instead of forcefully instilling great principles into the people, it was better to hide the principles in stories and guide them to explore them. Of course, not every story could be spread randomly. Wei Ci strictly controlled this aspect and even planned to gather a group of novelists to be in charge of this content. In order to expand his influence, he specially asked for Prime Minister Cheng's help. Now that he had the support of his lord, he was confident that he could do this better. As for those who criticized him behind his back for associating with unfashionable people, Wei Ci smiled mockingly. He couldn't be bothered. Jiang Pengji asked around and had a general understanding of the situation in Wanzhou, but she looked around and her gaze fell on Qing Yuan, who was seated in front of her. She asked, Gong Liao, is Mr. Qing not here today? Qing Yuan was Qing Cheng's second legitimate son. His courtesy name was Gong Liao. He had been in Wanzhou for less than half a year, and his performance had been remarkable. Considering his age, he had done quite well. With a gentle and humble temperament and a sincere and meticulous way of doing things, he would be popular no matter where he was. Qing Yuan replied, My father caught a cold last night. He was checked by the doctor this morning, but his condition is very serious. He is still bedridden. There was a worried look on his face. It was obvious that Qing Cheng was really sick. Jiang Pengji hurriedly asked, Mr. Qing fell ill? What did the doctor say? Qing Yuan said, the doctor said that my father was too worried and busy, and the cold caused the accumulated illness. Advantage, too busy. Jiang Pengji's expression froze, and she felt a little guilty. In the eyes of an outsider who didn't know the truth, Qing Cheng must have fallen sick from exhaustion because she exploited him too much. But Jiang Pengji really didn't cheat Qing Cheng. How did you fall sick from exhaustion? She frowned. Qing Yuan realized that he had said something wrong and hurriedly tried to remedy the situation. My father is getting on in years. Recently, he has been troubled by the annotations. My mother has tried to persuade him several times, but he refuses to rest. Qing Yuan's face was full of a helpless smile. He said, My father has a stubborn temperament. It is extremely difficult for others to shake his decision. Qing Cheng fell ill not because Jiang Pengji exploited him too much, but because he overestimated his physical strength. He was busy and refused to rest. Yesterday, he was also busy until late at night. He took a cold shower because he was greedy for the cold, and he didn't pay attention when he slept. Then he fell ill. Jiang Pengji asked in surprise, annotations? What annotations? Qing Yuan said, my father said that the annotations were inspired by Zixiao. The classics and historical collections are too obscure, and there is no unified sentence reading for each article. This causes the teacher to read sentences inconsistently when teaching students, causing them to misunderstand certain articles. My father has been thinking about how to mark simple and clear sentence reading, annotate the controversial articles, and lead the way for future generations. What was sentence reading? In ancient times, the place where the words stopped was called sentence or reading. Nowadays, the articles were all sentences. There were no so-called punctuation marks. The articles were stacked together. For example, if a web novel did not have any punctuation marks or paragraphs, what would that mean? Many sentences were passed from teacher to student. It was inevitable that there would be errors in the process of transmission. Some teachers even cherished their own knowledge and did not even bother to teach the students the correct sentence reading. It was really shocking. Qing Sheng had been worrying about this matter for the past few days. Wei Si's vernacular words gave him some inspiration. Hard-tongued classical Chinese would cause people to have different understandings of the same sentence, and thus lead to wrong interpretations. What about the most straightforward vernacular words? It could not be that there would be people who would chew on the words, take them out of context, and pass on the wrong understanding everywhere, right? If this annotation could be done well, the difficulty of students studying in the future would be greatly reduced, and many unnecessary misunderstandings would be avoided. However, there was no first place in literature, and no second place in martial arts. The same article could be interpreted differently by different people. Qing alone was not qualified to annotate all the books in the world. Even if he worked hard to do it, would others admit it? This was a difficult problem, and it worried Qing. Another difficult problem was sentence reading. He planned to use symbols with a certain meaning to break sentences, but sentence reading could not be decided by one person's opinion. The same sentence with different sentences had completely different meanings. Qing still had a lot of things to worry about. Under so much pressure, would Qing fall ill? Whether it was sentence reading or annotation, any one of them could cause the scholars in the world to criticize him. To put it bluntly, who was Qing? What right did he have to call himself the world's teacher? Yes, if these two things were really done, Qing would definitely leave his name in history. To put it bluntly, all the students who benefited from him would regard him as a half-teacher. Jiang Pengji saw the internal trouble at a glance. She said, "This matter is indeed tricky. I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to do it alone. Why don't you wait for the situation in the north of Dongqing to stabilize before you publish the literature examination and invite the scholars in the world to participate in the grand event?" Qing Yuan sighed. He and Jiang Pengji had the same opinion, but his father was too stubborn and would not turn back until he hit a brick wall. Only when the Lord's power was stronger would Qing's words carry more weight, and he would encounter less resistance. He planned to persuade Qing after his condition improved. This kind of thing was very likely to cause the world scholars to criticize him. It was better to be cautious. By the time Jiang Pengji finished her work, the orange sun had gradually sunk into the horizon. Chapter 8:11. It was a celebration feast, but it was more like a welcoming feast. Today's main character wasn't Jiang Pengji, but the three newbies who had just joined the group. After Feng Jin and the others secretly observed them, they were quite satisfied with the other two, except for Fu Wang. Qi Kuang was originally a centurion under Yang Tao's command, but because of his inconvenient legs and ugly appearance, he had never been put in an important position. Because of these experiences, Qi Kuang had a quiet personality and didn't easily talk to people. He looked like a pragmatic person who didn't cause trouble. The forces in Wanzhou today needed people like him who lived a lot and talked little. At least they wouldn't cause trouble and easily get involved with people. Xiao Guang had originally worked under Su Pei's command, but because his presence was weak and his background wasn't good, he hadn't been put in an important position for many years. Compared to Qi Kuang, Xiao Guang was quite talkative and tactful. No matter what others said, he could respond. Plus, he was recommended by Feng Zhen, so everyone had a good impression of Xiao Guang. Even if they didn't trust Xiao Guang, they had to trust Feng Zhen, right? The only one who didn't fit in was Fu Wang. He looked like a lone wolf that had left the group, and there was an indescribable arrogance in his eyes. It wasn't that they didn't want to interact with Fu Wang, it was because he was too cold and full of killing intent. The only thing missing was the words, "Strangers do not approach," written on his face. Among everyone present, the only one who had some friendship with Fu Wang and was naturally kind to him was Meng Hun. "General Fu, it's so boring to drink alone. Let me toast you. Thank you for your advice back then." Meng Hun sighed in his heart and turned to toast Fu Wang, who was sitting next to him. Fu Wang was 5 or 6 years younger than Meng Hun, but his qualifications and achievements were far higher than Meng Hun's. It was only right for the latter to be modest. "You and I are of the same generation, so there's no need to be modest." Fu Wang glanced sideways and saw the kind smile on Meng Hun's face. The unhappiness in his heart mostly dissipated. He picked up the wine cup on his table, and the two of them downed the wine in one gulp. Meng Hun wanted to sound out Fu Wang. It wasn't that he was gossipy, but he wanted to use this opportunity to help Fu Wang integrate into Wanzhou as soon as possible. He smiled and said, "Since General Fu has said so, I won't be modest. If we can be friends of the same generation, of course, I'd be more than happy." Fu Wang did not utter a word and poured himself a cup of wine. Meng Hun asked, "You didn't look worried just now. Did you encounter something difficult?" Fu Wang said with slight disappointment, "Since it's a celebratory banquet, there's no singing and dancing to liven things up, and there's no music to warm things up. It's really boring." Hearing this, Meng Hun smiled awkwardly but politely. Singing and dancing? His lord was too stingy. She didn't pay for dancers and singers at all. She wanted to see the content of the performances at the banquet? "All right, I'll go prepare it myself." Thinking of his lord's conduct, Meng Hun felt powerless. He couldn't help but lower his voice and complain, "I'm afraid it's impossible for General Fu to watch singing and dancing." Fu Wang raised his eyebrows, his gaze becoming more serious and inquisitive. "What do you mean?" "My lord always says that she doesn't feed idlers, so why would she be willing to spend so much money on singers and dancers? If General wishes to see a song and dance, I'm afraid that you can only watch a group of men playing with their throats, or Han Mei brandishing his spear, or Jian Yan brandishing his axe. Zixiao's painting skills are not bad, and Huayu's zither skills are outstanding." Fu Wang, if Fu Wang's inner voice could be translated into subtitles, it would probably be, he felt that he had entered an abnormal group of crazy demons. She could even skip singing and dancing, and she even asked her subordinates to prepare their own entertainment programs. Such a lord would be doomed sooner or later. That. Fu Wang suddenly remembered that Meng Hun had been with Jiang Pengji for a long time, dating back to when Jiang Pengji was still an ordinary scholar. His attitude changed because of this, and he became closer to Meng Hun. "There's something I want to ask you in private." Fu Wang approached Meng Hun and lowered his voice. The surroundings were filled with the noise of drinking, and laughter. His and Meng Hun's movements were inconspicuous. Meng Hun suddenly became more spirited. He said, "General, you don't have to be so polite. As long as it's something I know, I won't hide it from you." Fu Wang thought about it and asked a little embarrassedly, "Do you know how many maids the Lord has?" Meng Hun, he had been mysterious for so long just to ask such a question. Meng Hun coughed lightly and thought carefully. He was afraid that Fu Wang had taken a fancy to the maids around his lord. If that was the case, it would be difficult. Thus, he said with some uncertainty, "I remember there are only 3, right?" "Which 3?" Fu Wang perked up and his eyes lit up. Meng Hun's heart sank. He hesitated and said, "One is Lady Nongqin. Look, she's the one at the banquet. One is Xiaoyu's wife, Xuanmei. However, Xiaoyu's wife is still in Hejin County and hasn't come. The other is Lady Takshu. She's the steward of the Lord's inner court." Did Fu Wang take a fancy to one of them? There's no Lady Hui. Fu Wang almost couldn't wrap his head around it. Wasn't Hui Jun the Lord's maid? Meng Hun was surprised. Lady Hui? I'm not sure about Lady Hui's situation. She only appeared by the Lord's side after the imperial city of Qinzhou. It's hard to say whether she's the Lord's maid or not. But looking at the Lord's attitude, I'm afraid he values Lady Hui a lot. Huijuan's existence had always been mysterious. Meng Hun had known of her existence a long time ago, but he had only really met her after the rescue of the Emperor. He used this to send a hint to Fu Wang: as long as the Lord valued someone, the subordinates should not have the slightest bit of covetousness. Even if their Lord was female, this rule would still apply. Fu Wang asked, "Do you know where Lady Hui is now?" Meng Hun felt the hairs on his back stand up. He laughed dryly and probed, "General, have you taken a fancy to Lady Hui?" Fu Wang said calmly, "Of course not. I'm just curious." Meng Hun secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't want Fu Wang to fall because of a woman. No matter how he looked at it, if he had a conflict with the Lord because of Lady Hui, he would be looking for trouble for himself. At the banquet, Wei Xi seemed to be chatting and laughing with Feng Jin, but his attention was on Zhang Pengji. Feng Jin saw that he was absent-minded and followed Wei Xi's line of sight. He suddenly raised his eyebrows and there was some interest in his eyes. "Zixiao, why are you looking at the Lord like that?" Feng Jin's sudden question scared Wei Xi so much that his fingers paused. The wooden chopsticks in his hand hit the edge of the bowl, making a crisp sound. "Huaiyu, you scared me." Wei Xi put down the wooden chopsticks with a normal expression and said, "I'm just curious." "Curious about what?" Feng Jin was puzzled. "The Lord has been staring at General Fu since just now. Her gaze is a little unfriendly. I don't know what General Fu and Captain Meng said to make the Lord so unhappy." Wei Xi said gently, "These two are also slow. They didn't even notice that the Lord has already noticed them." Feng Jin's gaze fell on Zhang Pengji and then followed her line of sight to Fu Wang and Meng Hun. The main hall of the banquet was not small. No matter how much Feng Jin concentrated, he couldn't hear the conversation between Meng Hun and the others. "How do you know that the Lord heard what they said?" Maybe she felt that the two of them were putting their arms around each other's shoulders, so she used her gaze to warn them. Wei Xi smiled and said, "The Lord has excellent hearing." They thought that they were speaking softly, but the Lord definitely heard them. Chapter 8:12. Feng Jin was strangely silent for a moment and asked, "How good is it?" Wei Xi said with a smile, "Let General Fu and Captain Meng whisper at the door. My lord can hear them clearly." Feng Jin was speechless. At that moment, Feng Jin looked at Meng Hun and Wei Xi with some sympathy. They thought they were whispering and no one else heard them, but they didn't know that their lord heard them all. "Should we remind them? If we let them talk like that, it's hard to guarantee that they won't say something wrong after drinking. If something happened at the celebration banquet, they might be used by someone with ulterior motives." Wei Xi also lowered his voice. "Of course, leave this matter to me." Feng Jin inadvertently looked up and happened to meet Zhang Pengji's gaze. He was so scared that he almost threw the wine cup in his hand. According to Wei Xi, the Lord had excellent hearing. She could hear Meng Hun and Wei Xi's whispering, so naturally, she could also hear his conversation with Wei Xi. He was about to remind Wei Xi not to be impulsive, but before he could speak, he received a warning look from Zhang Pengji. Feng Jin silently swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. "It's better for you to die than for me." In such a short time, Feng Jin sold Wei Xi out without hesitation. Wei Xi didn't understand. He stepped forward and said, "My lord, I sent people to build the Green Jade House last year. Now there are more than 10 acres of farmland. 2 days ago, the tenant farmers in charge of farming sent the ripe fruits to the district headquarters. It's being frozen in the well now. Why don't we take it and have a taste?" Jiang Pengji thought for a while before she remembered what Wei Ci was referring to. The green jade house was commonly known as watermelon. Last year, she planted a small half-acre of watermelon in the district headquarters garden. The yield was not much, only enough for her and her subordinates to have a taste. Later, she felt that watermelon could be grown by the people and made money, so she planned to let some experienced tenant farmers take care of it. Unexpectedly, it was successfully planted this year. Calculating the time, it was indeed the season for watermelons to ripen. After Jiang Pengji agreed, Wei Ci asked the kitchen chef to fetch the watermelon from the well. He opened the watermelon with a knife, and the bright red flesh gave off a cold air. Watermelons were either cut into slices or split in half and eaten with a spoon. But these two ways of eating were too vulgar. Wei Ci could not imagine a gentleman like Feng Jin holding half a round watermelon in his left hand and holding a spoon in his right, scooping out a big piece of watermelon pulp and stuffing it into his mouth. That scene was too beautiful, he could not bear to imagine it. Thus, he instructed the chef to cut off the skin of the melon and cut the pulp into small pieces, placing them on a small plate. It was convenient to eat and also very pleasing to the eye. More than 10 mu of watermelons have been planted. What's the yield of each mu? Watermelons could only be found in small countries in the western region. If Gu Xian had not brought a few live seedlings to Jiang Pengji would not have been able to eat them. Apart from the few newcomers, the rest of the people present had only eaten a little last year. Wei Ci reported, 1 mu has about 5,000 caddies, 5,000 jin. When everyone heard this number, they were speechless. This production was really high. Fu Wang ate a small piece. The sweet melon flesh brought with it an ice-cold chill, making him feel refreshed. Why is it all water? Looking at the pieces of melon flesh, he thought that it was like an ordinary fruit. Who knew that when he bit into it, it was all juice? But the fruit was quite delicious, and he finished a plate in a short while. Watermelons are like this. They quench thirst and relieve heat in summer. Jiang Pengji was quite satisfied with the yield of watermelons per mu. With the current agricultural methods, it was considered a bumper harvest to be able to produce 5,000 caddies per mu. If she turned on the live stream, the audience would agree with her idea. In the world of the live stream audience, the yield per mu was about 7,000 to 10,000, depending on the type of watermelon. Jiang Pengji asked again, tenant farmers have been planting for a year, so they should have some experience. If we plant the watermelons for the people, can they grow them? Watermelons had a high yield, were delicious, and were rare. There should be a market for them. If the people were to plant some, they would definitely benefit a lot. The premise for large-scale planting was that this thing could not be pretentious. Otherwise, if the people responded to the call to plant watermelons, but because of their lack of experience, the watermelons would all die. Wouldn't it be a huge loss? Wei Ci responded smoothly, as if he had already expected this question from Jiang Pengji. He replied seriously, tenant farmers have been taking care of it for a year, so they have some experience. This thing likes to be dry and not wet. It likes sandy soil more than clay. If the weather is cloudy and the fields are too wet, the watermelon seedlings are prone to diseases. It might even affect the yield when it matures. Jiang Pengji ate the watermelon while thinking. Let's talk about this in detail tomorrow. She already had a general plan in mind. She planned to discuss it in detail with a few subordinates the next day and sort out a plan. It was a celebratory feast, so it was not suitable to talk about such serious matters. Because Jiang Pengji did not like noise, the crowd did not play for too long, so the celebratory feast ended earlier. Jiang Pengji asked someone to prepare hot soup to wash away the sticky sweat and smell of alcohol on her body. Chapter 8:13. No matter how likable his daughter was, she was still a naughty child. Feng Jin simply threw the child to the wet nurse and let Changsheng go back to her room to sleep. Changsheng's diet has to be more restricted. If she gets any fatter, she won't be able to watch. Feng Jin felt that he should be more ruthless. Which woman of the Feng clan didn't go through such a life? If he couldn't indulge her, he would be harming her. After a period of time, I will write another letter to Big Brother and ask him to help me find a female teacher with a better temperament. Changxing is still young, but enlightenment should be put on the agenda. In the end, he still doted on his daughter. Feng Jin felt that the teacher's temper was far more important than his talent. A teacher for a day, a father for a lifetime. The teacher was a teacher. As a student, Changxing could not disobey him. However, Changxing had been spoiled by the couple since she was young. She had a bad temper. If she was punished by the teacher for being mischievous, their hearts would ache. Choose someone with a good temper, or at least a higher tolerance level. At the mention of enlightenment and rules, Wei Jingxian's face changed. She hesitated and said, "But Changxing is still young." Feng Jin's heart wavered. In the end, he gritted his teeth and said, "Just because she's young doesn't mean she's immature. You and I can't indulge her." In the era where 13 or 14 years old could start a family and start a career, Changxing was already 2 years old. Indeed, she was not considered young. If it was in the Feng family, when a child could speak fluently, he would be initiated to read and learn the rules. How could he be as leisurely as Changxing? Look at her daily eating frequency. If she didn't gain so much weight, it would be a waste of the fat on her body. Moreover, the earlier Changxing becomes sensible, the more leisurely you will be. He was a man with a wife and a daughter. Why was he living like Su Ku, alone in an empty room every night? No matter how unwilling Wei Jingxian was, she could not object. Feng Jin doted on his daughter. How could he harm Changxing? Parents love their children and have far-reaching plans. But Feng Jin had to ask Changxing if she was willing or not. "Nanny," Changxing was wronged as she was carried back to her courtyard by the wet nurse. She took off her clothes and laid on the couch. The wet nurse helped her cover the brocade quilt. "What's wrong, madam?" The wet nurse was a gentle and dignified woman. Although she was called a wet nurse, in fact, Changxing grew up drinking Wei Jingxian's breast milk. This wet nurse was only responsible for taking care of Changxing's daily life. "Does your stomach still feel uncomfortable?" Her parents indulged her, so Changxing could eat whatever she wanted every day. She had more than 5 or 6 meals a day, and snacks before bed were a must. "Father." Changxing pouted, feeling wronged. "You don't want Changxing anymore?" The wet nurse was startled. With a panicked expression on her face, she hurriedly said, "Eldest lady, you can't say such things carelessly." Laoi loved Yangzi the most. He held her in his hands, afraid that she would fall. He held her in his mouth, afraid that she would melt. He truly placed her at the top of his heart. "Auntie, you can't say these words again." Although a child's words carried no harm, a child's unintentional words could cause the listener to take it to heart and alienate the father-daughter relationship. Changxing blinked her eyes and mumbled a response. Then, she turned around and did whatever was most comfortable. "Nanny." Changxing closed her eyes and pretended to doze, but she still could not fall asleep. "I miss Wei Susu." The wet nurse said with a troubled expression, "If it's already tonight, I'm afraid Mr. Wei has already fallen asleep." The Wei Susu that Changxing mentioned was none other than Wei Ci, who was a street away from Feng Jin. Ignoring the wet nurse's words, Changxing clumsily climbed up from the bed, hugged her clothes, and wanted to go out. "Look for Wei Susu." The wet nurse was speechless. Although Changxing was young, she had an unusually bad temper. It was not that she had a bad temper, but she was rather stubborn. She would do whatever she wanted to do on a whim, and she would throw a tantrum if anyone tried to stop her. Feng Jin and his wife pampered their only daughter, and the servants complained incessantly. The wet nurse could only find someone to ask for advice from Feng Jin and his wife. Once the eldest lady's stubborn temper flared up, no one could suppress it. Feng Jin, who was enjoying the world of the two of them tenderly and sweetly with his wife, "What a fraud, my daughter. Let her look for her, and send someone to watch over her. Please, Zixiao, take Changxing in for one night, and bring her back tomorrow. Feng Jin could not get angry even if he wanted to, but he could not let his daughter run out of the residence alone, so he could only send someone to escort her. He had a good personal relationship with Wei Xi, and would occasionally send Wei Xi an invitation to be a guest at his house. Perhaps it was fate, but Changxing was exceptionally fond of this beautiful uncle. Later, Feng Jin understood that his daughter was greedy for beauty, and had taken a fancy to Wei Xi's face. At such a young age, she was so obsessed with looks. Wei Jingxian held back her laughter and said, "It's so late, will Changxing disturb him if she goes over?" Feng Jin secretly rolled his eyes. Wei Xi was a loner, single, and did not have a nightlife. What was there to disturb about? To be able to send the little ancestor out, he felt that his ears were at peace. Thus, Wei Xi was rewarded with a bun that knocked on the door in the middle of the night. Changxing. Wei Xi had not gone to sleep yet, and was still working late at night. He vaguely heard a knock on the door, and the doorkeeper told him that there was a visitor. He did not expect that the other party was actually Changxing. According to the wet nurse who served Changxing, this girl ran out on her own. "Girl, did you quarrel with your father again?" Wei Xi smiled as he picked up the heavy Changxing, and said to the women who served Changxing, "Go back and tell Huayu that Changxing will stay here tonight. Ask him to send someone over to pick her up tomorrow." There were no other women in Wei Xi's residence, except for the kitchen maids and the servants who washed the clothes. Occasionally, Changxing came to stay at his place, and he would chase away all the female servants who served Changxing. It would be bad for his reputation if these women stayed in his residence. Changxing pursed her lips and wrapped her arms around Wei Xi's neck. She said with a serious face, "Father wants a younger brother, not Changxing." Wei Xi held back his laughter. It turned out that she felt abandoned and felt insecure. He comforted her, "How can that be? 10 younger brothers can't compare to Changxing's cuteness." Changxing was still a little angry. Although she was young, she was quite sensitive to the emotions of others. For example, she instinctively knew that Jiang Pengji belonged to the kind of thighs that she had to cling onto tightly. If her father was fierce to her, it would be right to cling onto Jiang Pengji's thighs. Another example was that she had a natural closeness to Wei Xi. Because she felt that Wei Xi liked her very much. Because of this, Wei Xi was a completely harmless existence to her. But father still wants a younger brother. The immortal person heaved a deep sigh, and obediently sat next to Wei Xi. His pair of black grape-like eyes rolled around randomly, looking at this and that. Although she was sitting, her heart had long since flown to an unknown place, and her little butt was wriggling restlessly. Wei Xi put down his brush. With Changxing, the little ancestor, around, he knew that he could not stay up late to work tonight. Changxing is the best. Changxing felt greatly comforted. She rubbed against him coquettishly. Wei Susu is the best. Although Wei Xi was not married and had a family, his posture when taking care of a child was very standard. It did not take long for him to coax Changxing until she became tired. He moved his somewhat sore arms and secretly laughed at Feng Jin's indulgence of the child. He actually raised the child to be so heavy. Chapter 8:14. Wei Xi frowned slightly unhappily. It's so late. Who could it be? It was quite rude to visit in the middle of the night. Changxing was a child and could not be taken seriously, but it might not be the case for an adult. The gatekeeper lowered his head. This person was honest and dutiful. He did not dare to say a word easily. Moreover, he really could not describe it. The person did not announce his origin at all. He only said that he was a friend of his master. Forget it. I'll go and take a look. Wei Xi sighed and carried Changxing to the reception hall. When the familiar back came into view, he was so shocked that he almost threw Changxing out. Of course, even if he wanted to, he could not. Changxing was too heavy. The owner of the beautiful figure put down her wide cloak hood, revealing a calm and cold face. She raised her eyebrows and looked at the child in Wei Xi's arms. "Greetings, my lord." You have a child? Jiang Pengji's gaze fell on Changxing's face. The child's cheeks were chubby and there were 2 blushes on her cheeks. She looked especially cute. Wei Ci smiled bitterly. Why do you make fun of me, my lord? This is Changxing from Huayu's family. You haven't seen her for half a year. I'm afraid you've forgotten. Children grew up with the wind. Not to mention half a year, they might not recognize each other in half a month. She's gained some weight. I almost didn't recognize her. It's too heavy for you to carry. Leave her with me. Jiang Pengji glanced at Wei Ci's body. She always felt that Changxing could crush him to death. Wei Ci lowered his head in silence, but he still handed Changxing to her. Why is Huayu's child here? Jiang Pengji asked out of boredom. Huayu probably wanted to have another child, but Changxing, who was sharp by nature, discovered his intentions. Changxing probably felt that Huayu was going to abandon her. She felt uncomfortable and came to Ci for comfort. Children are forgetful. When they wake up tomorrow, they'll forget all their troubles. Children may be young, but they might understand everything. They just can't express it. Wei Ci felt that even if they were children, adults should not casually ignore their existence and feelings. Jiang Pengji responded with an "oh" and declined to comment further. There were a few lamps burning in the hall. The orange candlelight was faintly discernible in the dark, just like his perturbed mood. My lord, what brings you here so late at night? Wei Ci saw that Jiang Pengji did not speak for a long time. She only looked silently at Changxing, who was slowly sleeping soundly. He only felt a lump in his throat. He was almost pulled into his memories. He could only take the initiative to find a topic to break the current atmosphere. Jiang Pengji patted Changxing lightly and took the initiative to lower her voice. It was inconvenient to ask you at the banquet earlier, how is the matter in the northern borderline going? Wei Ci's nerves tightened. He threw the fragmented images in his mind into the depths of his memory and reported with a straight face. My lord, everything is going according to plan. Are there any unusual movements in the northern borderline? Did the higher-ups ask about the herdsmen raising rabbits and goats in private? Wei Ci shook his head. There is no such news yet. Because of the horse plague last year, the imperial court's regime was in turmoil. The king of the northern borderline was still in power, but the other tribes in the northern borderline were already complaining. In order to eliminate these voices, the king of the northern borderline took action continuously. They're busy fighting for power and don't even have time to care about a few big horse farms, so why would they care about the lives of ordinary herdsmen? The chances of them finding out are not high. Whether it was in this life or the previous life, the horse plague was an unavoidable catastrophe for the northern borderline. If it wasn't for the horse plague that greatly damaged the vitality of the northern borderline and they didn't have the strength to go south for a few years, Dongqing would probably be in danger. The horse plague in the previous life caused the northern borderline to lose the best opportunity to go south. When they recovered their vitality, the central plains was already occupied by a ferocious wolf. At that time, the northern borderline still wanted to take advantage of the chaos in the central plains and reap the benefits. They never expected that Jiang Pengji, who had been fighting to the death with the various feudal vassals, would suddenly stop. She didn't hesitate to cede her interests, adopt the diplomatic policy of forming an alliance, and turn around to attack the northern borderline. When the northern borderline was killed by her, they would turn around and shed all pretense of cordiality with their allies. In the previous life, the northern borderline was cannon fodder. In this life, they would probably end up even worse. The Lord was so diligent in managing the forces in the northern borderline, wasn't it to sharpen her knife to attack the northern borderline? Wei Ci said, when the northern borderline's royal court finds out, it may already be 2 or 3 years later. By that time, there were only 2 paths in front of the northern borderline. The first was to fight with their backs to the wall. Regardless of the consequences, they would continue to develop the pastures, raise war horses, and increase their combat power. As long as they conquered the central plains, they would have vast and fertile land and inexhaustible resources. They would no longer have to be crowded in the northern borderline, which lacked food. The second was to allocate manpower to deal with the rabbits and sheep that showed signs of flooding, leaving time for the pastures to recover. If it was the former, it would be a huge gamble for the northern borderline. If they won, they would have everything. If they lost, they would lose all their capital, not even their underwear would be left. If it was the latter, the northern borderline's recovery would be delayed for a few more years. This time was enough for Jiang Pengji to develop her forces. Jiang Pengji was very satisfied when she heard that. If there were a few more multi-purpose angels like Wei Ci, she probably wouldn't have to worry about manpower anymore. Wei Ci felt uneasy all over. He didn't even dare to look at Jiang Pengji. His eyes were evasive. If my lord wants to ask about this, we can talk about it tomorrow. Why did you come so late at night? His lord's identity had just been restored. If it was revealed that she appeared in her subordinate's house late at night, there was no telling what kind of ugly scandals would spread. I came when I wanted to, Jiang Pengji said. Wei Ci was speechless. This was really in line with his lord's usual domineering style. After the two of them finished talking about official matters, the atmosphere fell into a strange silence again. It was like mud that was getting thicker and thicker, unable to be stirred no matter what. Wei Ci's gaze swept over Changsheng, who was sleeping soundly. A question suddenly welled up in his mind. He couldn't suppress that impulse at all. I heard from Huayu that Changsheng's nickname was given by my lord. Jiang Pengji looked up at him and grunted. Isn't there a custom of fathers asking passers-by to name their newborn children in order to seek happiness? Huayu came to me to ask for it. I can't possibly reject him, can I? What's more, I personally delivered Changsheng. She's likable. Wei Ci muttered, a peaceful and carefree life, a long and happy life. Jiang Pengji frowned secretly. What Wei Ci said was the meaning behind the name she had given Changsheng in the past. Wei Ci said mysteriously, I heard from Huayu that he's always wanted another child. When the time comes, I'm afraid he'll come to you for help. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, my literary talent isn't good enough, and my name is also vulgar. Now that I have Changsheng, Huayu won't rush to be abused. She was definitely not a coward when it came to calculating, but when it came to literary talent like reciting poems and couplets, she was really anxious. She wasn't illiterate, but in front of a real scholar, she was probably not far from being illiterate. That's not necessarily true. Even if it's just for peace of mind, Huayu will also ask for a name. Based on what you're saying, I should think about it in advance in case I need it. Jiang Pengji originally wanted Wei Ci to be the gunslinger and help her come up with a male and female name. However, she could tell that Wei Ci wasn't in a good mood, so she could only do it herself. Since we have Changsheng, why don't we get Fusho as well? Whether it's Changsheng or Fusho, it can be a male or female name. The meaning isn't bad. Wei Ci was completely silent. Chapter 8:15. What was he upset about? Was it because of the two children's names? Jiang Pengji's heart skipped a beat. She vaguely guessed something. What special meaning do these two names have to you? Wei Ci secretly took a deep breath to relieve the pulling pain in his chest. His pale face regained some color. There's no special meaning. He answered with a smile, but the smile on his face looked a little haggard and weak. Jiang Pengji did not ask further. She changed the topic and said, Does Changsheng often stay at your house? Who and where is she? Wei Ci stood up and led the way. He was the only master in the manor. The other servants had their own residences, so most of the rooms in the manor were empty. Because Changsheng often came over to disturb him, Wei Ci simply prepared a room for her. The interior decoration was very elegant. Jiang Pengji said with a smile, This girl sleeps soundly, but her sleeping posture is really terrible. The children of rich and powerful families had to be disciplined in their every word and action. Even their sleeping posture had to be corrected. If Changsheng's sleeping posture was in another family, she would be singled out and criticized. Even the servants who served her would be punished. Although the weather is getting warmer, it's not good to keep kicking the blanket. Wei Ci saw that Changxing's cheeks were red from sleep. She shook her feet and kicked the blanket to the bottom of the bed. He could not help but laugh. He raised his hand and covered her with the thin blanket. Jiang Pengji looked at Wei Ci for a long time without saying a word. Her stare made him uncomfortable. He wanted to hide but could not. In the end, he could only ask Jiang Pengji with a bitter smile, "Why are you looking at me like that, my lord? Is there something on my face?" Jiang Pengji then shifted her gaze away. Wei Ci heaved a long sigh of relief. But what she asked next scared him so much that his limbs became stiff. He broke out in a cold sweat and almost forgot to breathe. "Zixiao, you're almost 24 this year, right? Why is there still no movement at home?" In the era of the live stream audience, 24 years old was the age when one had just graduated from university and was in high spirits. There was no hurry to get married. In Jiang Pengji's era, 24 years old was considered a minor in the eyes of the law. It was not the legal age for marriage. In this era, a normal 24-year-old man who was slightly dissolute could have children who could form a baseball team. Look at Wei Ci. Not only was he not married, he did not even have a concubine or a concubine. His usual nightlife was spent with official duties. When he was free, he would either visit his relatives and friends or kill time with books. He had never set foot in the world of mortals. He was clearly an ordinary person in the secular world, but he lived like an ascetic monk. How can a real man start a family without making any contributions? Wei Ci threw out an all-purpose excuse. Moreover, marriage requires the consent of the parents and the words of the matchmaker. Now that my father's clan is in Zhongzhou, I'm afraid they won't be able to attend to Ci. I'm not in a hurry right now. I'll delay it for a few more years. There's no hurry. Jiang Pengji smiled. Haven't made any contributions? How could that be? Zixiao is too humble about this. In terms of contributions, there are very few people who can compare to you. Jiang Pengji's words were not flattery. They came from the bottom of her heart. Wei Ci kept a low profile and his presence was weak, but how could his contributions be considered small? Not to mention anything else, just the fact that he had stationed his troops in the fields was enough to earn him a place in the history books. Throughout the ages, how many people had fought their whole lives for the sake of leaving their names in history? In the end, who had succeeded? Wei Ci said that he had not made any contributions. In Jiang Pengji's opinion, he was being overly humble. As for the words of the matchmaker and the orders of the parents, special methods are used during special times. Your relatives and clan are all in Zhongzhou, which is thousands of miles away. In this lifetime, you don't know if you will have the chance to meet them again. If you never see them, do you really intend to be alone for the rest of your life? At that moment, Wei Ci raised his head. His expression was frighteningly calm. His eyes carried a depth that was difficult for others to pry into. Jiang Pengji suggested with a smile, "Why don't we do it this way? I'll be the matchmaker for you." After she finished speaking, she noticed that Wei Ci's gaze and expression had become unusually complicated. It was as if there was a battle going on in his heart. It was difficult to determine the victor. Wei Ci's thoughts were dragged into a swamp by his memories. Fragments of the past flashed before his eyes. Take the child back. You know what to do. Your subject knows that Ting Xiami suffered a hemorrhage during childbirth yesterday. She risked her life to give birth to a child. Your Majesty, do you want to give the child a nickname? Call him Fushou. From now on, he will follow your surname. You have full authority to decide everything. You don't have to ask me. The world had just stabilized. All the officials were worried about the heir. The emperor wanted to appoint the eldest daughter as the heir, but he was obstructed by the imperial censor. At that moment, the emperor was pregnant for the second time. Everyone focused their attention on this child. They were eager to give birth to a crown prince. Unfortunately, the situation was turbulent and natural disasters were endless. The Red Lotus rebels were perverse. They even spread their teachings to the inner residences of the court officials. After careful planning, they prepared for an assassination. In the chaos, the emperor gave birth with great difficulty. It was a male child that everyone had hoped for. He should have been conferred the title of crown prince as soon as he was born. Unfortunately, the child was unlucky. He died the moment he was born. They could only confer him the title of crown prince. After this disaster, it was difficult for the emperor to conceive again. The country could not be without heirs. The matter of appointing the crown princess was brought up to the surface again. This time, the officials were as quiet as chickens. They did not dare to have any objections. Wei Zixiao, you should understand. If Fushou is alive, only death awaits me and Changsheng, I understand. I will take good care of Fushou. Before the 5 countries were unified, the struggle for power was not obvious. But once the countries were unified, all kinds of conflicts broke out. From the emperor's rise to power to his ascension to the throne, the aristocratic families had always been suppressed. After the country was unified, the aristocratic families could only form an alliance in private. They wanted to contend with the emperor and seize power. Wei Ci was clear that there could not be a crown prince at this time. Therefore, Fushou, who had just been born, was forced to die young. He changed his appearance and became the son of the Tang concubine in Wei Ci's manner. The key was that the Tang concubine was a made-up character. Fortunately, Wei Ci did not have a strong sense of existence. He behaved according to the rules. The officials who were fighting fiercely did not notice him at all. No one connected Crown Prince Zhang Zhua, who died young, with Wei Ci's illegitimate son. When Wei Ci could not extricate himself from his memories, Jiang Pengji's face was magnified in front of his eyes. He was so scared that he suddenly leaned back. Fortunately, both of them were kneeling. Otherwise, he would have hit the back of his head hard on the ground. If I told Zisher that I wanted to give him a beauty, he would definitely be overjoyed. Why are you not willing? Jiang Pengji placed one hand on the ground beside his ear and looked at Wei Ci's panic-stricken and pale face with a smile. She said helplessly, I'm not a dreadful beast. Every time I get close to you, you always show a frightened look. Wei Ci took a deep breath and his thoughts became much clearer. I'm not very brave. I will naturally be frightened when my lord teases me like this. Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue. His words were rather resentful. Wei Ci said, Can you get up, my lord? This is not appropriate. It will damage your reputation. Your mansion is empty, and there is no one guarding outside. Who would know? Wei Ci could not push her away. His face suddenly turned red and pale. Even the red veins at the corners of his eyes were filled with embarrassment. Jiang Pengji could not force him too much. She could only get up. Chapter 8:16. Wei Ci looked down and turned his head, trying not to look at Jiang Pengji. Of course, the name was not important, but the person. But how would she know what was bothering him? Names could be given, but what if the person was different? He did not want to serve the emperor in this life. She would meet another like-minded partner. What would that have to do with Wei Ci? 2 of the most important names to him had been given to someone else, and the future would be completely different from the history he knew. This was exactly what he wanted to see. Even so, the discomfort in his heart could not be alleviated in a short period of time. A man's mind is really hard to understand. Jiang Pengji sighed. Before Wei Ci could react, she suddenly covered her waist and frowned, as if she was enduring the pain. Wei Ci was not in the mood to care about anything else. He quickly asked with concern, Are you feeling unwell, my lord? Jiang Pengji's lips were white. I had to fight in person to conquer Gemin Pass. Before she finished speaking, Wei Ci had already imagined a tragic drama. Countless bloody scenes seemed to flash before his eyes. It has been more than a month since the battle at Gemin Pass. Why hasn't my lord recovered? Wei Ci did not dare to touch her, for fear of accidentally touching her wounds. She was stubborn by nature and looked weak in front of others. She must have been seriously injured and had yet to recover. As expected, Jiang Pengji gradually relaxed her brows and said carelessly, "Maybe the wounds are too deep to kill." Wei Ci felt a fire burning in his chest again. Whether it was in his previous life or this one, this person did not take care of her body. What did she mean by not killing? She was still young and healthy. She could roam around without any problems, so there was nothing wrong with her. But when she grew older, wouldn't the old wounds torture her to death? Ci, call the doctor over. Wei Ci's voice was low, and his words were irresistible. Jiang Pengji did not allow him to do that. She raised her hand and grabbed his hand, preventing him from getting up. "No need, it's just a small injury." She smiled faintly and pulled Wei Ci to her side. She spoke before he could object. "Why don't you look at the sky outside? What day is it now?" If they called for the doctor, the news of Governor Liu staying overnight at his subordinate's house would spread before daybreak. In the past, this would have been a wonderful story. Now that I've recovered my true gender, it's no longer a story but a scandal. Jiang Pengji's words were like a basin of cold water falling from the sky, freezing Wei Ci awake from the inside out. His feverish brain also cooled down. The situation she described was indeed what Wei Ci was afraid of, but it was even more unbearable for him to watch Jiang Pengji endure the pain and not seek treatment. Perhaps the wound accidentally split open. It shouldn't be a problem. When Jiang Pengji said this, she did not let go of Wei Ci's hand. Wei Ci's attention was attracted again, so he did not notice. "Don't talk. Just let me calm down." Wei Ci had no choice but to compromise. He suggested, "My lord, why don't I send you back to the district headquarters in secret?" Jiang Pengji said shamelessly, "There's no need. Returning to the district headquarters would alarm the guards and the gatekeeper. Wouldn't that be revealing the truth? Zixiao, why don't you kindly help me clean up a room? If it's too late, I can make do with Changxing for the night." What else could Wei Ci say? "You're the lord. You're the boss. You have the final say in everything." Just as he was about to get up, he was embarrassed to find that his right hand had been held by her. Their skin that was in contact with each other was sweating, but she did not let go. "I'm sleepy. Zixiao, don't disturb me." Jiang Pengji wanted to lie down and sleep without any explanation. Wei Ci could only swallow the words in his stomach. He maintained his kneeling position stiffly and looked at the person who was carelessly using his legs as a pillow. He was stunned and could not get angry at all. He kept his eyelids open, which kept fighting. He planned to release his right hand when Jiang Pengji fell asleep. At that moment, Changxing made full use of her terrible sleeping position. She successfully twisted her body and flipped from the head of the bed to the end. The thin blanket covering her body was kicked to the side of the bed. Her plump body was like a fresh flour pancake, lying on the mattress in a posture of a rooster standing on one leg. She licked her lips. There were only a few teeth in her mouth. Sparkling saliva dripped from the corner of her mouth. Wei Ci's eyebrows twitched violently. He carefully tilted his upper body and pulled over the thin blanket that Changxing had abandoned. He covered her properly again. As for carrying Changxing from the end of the bed to the head of the bed and continuing to sleep, he really could not do such a difficult action now. Looking at Changxing's sleeping face, then looking at the person on his lap who was obviously acting like a hooligan, Wei Ci only felt that his head was hurting. Why did he feel that he could no longer hide his identity? Why did he feel that Jiang Pengji did it on purpose? This was probably his hallucination, wasn't it? Wei Ci sighed. He could only use his hand to support himself on the high cushion and find a slightly more comfortable position to lean against. The surroundings were too quiet. He thought about many things in his mind. None of them were related to work. He felt that he had fallen. Perhaps he was too sleepy. Wei Si could not help but point to his forehead and fall asleep in a daze. However, the dream was extremely unstable. Various scenes appeared one after another. Those uncles only want my younger brother and don't want Changsheng. Grand tutor, I am a burden to mother, am I not? The girl's words caused Wei Si's heart to ache. The scene changed again. In the blink of an eye, the crying girl became a slender and elegant grand nun. Her expression was as rare as her mother's. Grand tutor, is that my younger brother? Wei Si said in the dream. Your Highness, no one in this world can be your younger brother. Mother told me the truth. Grand tutor, you don't have to be so timid. I will take good care of Grand tutor and my younger brother, although they were not official, they were blood relatives after all. In the 18th year of Yongchen's reign in the Jiang dynasty, Emperor Chen was seriously ill. Everyone in the court was in a state of panic. It was at this time that a case named Crown Prince Zhang Zhua shocked the court. I am Crown Prince Zhang Zhua. Unfilial son. The more time passed, the more chaotic the dream became. Wei Si stood on the spot in a daze. In the chaos, he did not know what was happening in the world. The scenes melted in an instant and twisted into countless demons and monsters. They all laughed sinisterly and pounced on him. Just as he was about to be swallowed by the demons, Wei Si shouted in horror. His body suddenly leaned forward. Jiang Pengji was pretending to be asleep at first. Later on, she really fell asleep. When the sky was just beginning to brighten, she was awakened by the subtle movements of Wei Si's nightmare. Wei Si was covered in cold sweat. His face was pale and his lips were trembling slightly because of fear. Chapter 8:17. According to the plot described by the audience in the streaming room, it was time for a romantic and melodramatic kiss. Sure enough, she shouldn't have trusted the group of singles in the streaming room. If a group of singles had a strategy to seduce someone, would they still be single? Jiang Pengji secretly ridiculed them. She didn't know that Wei Si was also frightened by her. First, he had a nightmare. After waking up, he was shocked. After the shock, he suffered a tragic blow. His nose bumped into someone's face. It couldn't be more awkward. Wei Si couldn't care less about the pain. He hurriedly prepared to bow down and apologize. Unfortunately, he had maintained his kneeling position for a whole night. Jiang Pengji even used him as a lap pillow. Now his legs were numb and he almost lost feeling. He sat on the ground in a sorry state. Tears welled up in his eyes. He looked pitiful. Jiang Pengji raised her hand and rubbed her cheek. She didn't tease Wei Si about this embarrassing incident, lest she provoked him. Was it a nightmare just now? Jiang Pengji returned to normal, as if the episode just now had never happened. Look at you. Even your face is covered in cold sweat. Because the nightmare lasted too long, Wei Si's reaction was slightly slow. He didn't even have the energy to investigate what happened just now. I had a nightmare. Wei Si said with lingering fear, I dreamed of many evil ghosts. They almost tore me apart, he panted. Fear flashed through his dark, jade-like eyes, as if the lingering power of the nightmare had yet to dissipate. Jiang Pengji tilted her head. She looked curious. She said, the evil ghosts in the nightmare? Just now, I heard you saying things like, Crown Prince Zhang Zhua, unfilial son, His Highness, and so on. What exactly did you dream of? Why are you so scared? If Wei Si's complexion was said to be a little human before, when Jiang Pengji asked this question, his face suddenly turned as white as a sheet. Wei Si opened his mouth. Something was stuck in his throat. He couldn't make a sound. An impulse to escape surged in his heart. Zixiao. Jiang Pengji raised her hand and placed it on his forehead. His forehead, which was covered in sweat, was cold and sticky. It gave people an extremely uncomfortable feeling. She touched ice, but to Wei Si, it was scorching hot. It was like a cluster of flames quietly emitting warmth and dispelling the cold. My lord. Wei Ci was hesitant. Under the other party's concerned gaze, he awkwardly looked away. I'm fine. Jiang Pengji frowned slightly. How did Wei Ci's behavior look like he was fine? Who was the Crown Prince Zhang Zhua that Wei Ci dreamt of? His Highness Chang Sheng was definitely not the little fat boy who was sleeping soundly beside him. That person had a very important meaning to Wei Ci. As for the mutterings like unfilial son, kneel down for good fortune and longevity, unfilial son pretending to be the heir of the emperor, and deserve to be executed, she felt that the information was too much. Jiang Pengji asked, You haven't answered me yet. What did you dream about? Wei Ci's heart sank. The warmth that he had painstakingly gathered dissipated in an instant. He trembled and said, I can't remember clearly. I only remember that the dream just now was very scary. There were thousands of malicious ghosts chasing after me, demanding my life. I woke up when I stepped on air. Jiang Pengji thought of the audience's advice and comforted him. Dreams and reality are opposites. Don't take it to heart. It's already dawn outside. I see that you haven't slept well all night. Why don't you go and get some sleep? The matters in the government office can be postponed for half a day. Wei Ci's heart calmed down a little and he heaved a long sigh of relief. Jiang Pengji comforted him like that, which meant that the previous story could be forgotten. Thank you for your understanding, my lord. Jiang Pengji put on a wide hood and sneaked out from the side door. With her skills, she would naturally not be discovered. Wei Ci rubbed his dizzy head and prepared to go back and get some sleep. 5 years had passed since he returned to his youth. He thought that he had gradually forgotten about the past. Who knew that he would be caught red-handed by his lord last night? He was really scared out of his wits just now. He knew that Her Majesty was not a suspicious person, but she was more difficult to deal with than a suspicious person. Because any clues could become a stepping stone for her to pry into the truth. Ordinary people could not hide from her eyes at all. Since the establishment of the Jiang Kingdom, the aristocratic families had formed an alliance. They seemed powerful, but when had they not been manipulated by her like monkeys in the palm of her hand? The aristocratic families were like prey in a spider's web. The more they struggled, the more powerless they became. In the face of such an empress, he had to be tense at all times, lest the other party see through his disguise in a moment of carelessness. He had no reason not to be afraid. Even if Her Majesty had just turned 18 years old, she was still not to be trifled with. Since Her Majesty's rise to power, the aristocratic families had been like a carrot, peeling off a layer of the other party's skin from time to time. After being peeled like this for 18 years, even the fattest carrot had become a thin carrot. Every time the aristocratic families were full of confidence that they would be able to make a comeback, reality would always slap their cheeks swollen. The emperor and his ministers who were extremely harmonious in the imperial court fought to the death in the imperial court. In terms of danger, there were only 3 times that it was the most dangerous. The first time was the riot of the Red Lotus Group. It happened to coincide with Her Majesty's difficult labor and birthday. Many people mistakenly said that Her Majesty had died. Who said that I had a difficult labor? A group of ministers hurriedly cried and mourned. When Her Majesty appeared with a sneer on her face, more than a dozen faces uniformly turned gray. The second time was when Her Majesty wantonly carried out imperial examinations and land reform. The interests of the aristocratic families were affected, and they secretly planned a palace coup. The third time was in the 18th year of Yongchen. Her Majesty was seriously ill and bedridden for several months. Crown Prince Zhang Zhua, supported by the aristocratic families, tried to force her to abdicate. Thinking of the last reason, Wei Ci felt waves of pain in his chest. It was so painful that he could not help but cover his chest, and his face turned pale. The son that he had painstakingly taught for more than a decade was actually stupid enough to be used by others. Instead, he turned against his biological parents. Was the temptation of imperial power and the throne really so terrifying? Wei Ci returned to his dream in a daze. He heard a familiar roar. I was originally the son of the emperor, the legitimate crown prince. Now, I have been framed by scoundrels and become the son of a concubine. Is this really fair? He stood there in a daze. His divine senses were withdrawn from his body, and he could not react. Every word pierced his heart. Who told you that you are the legitimate crown prince? Crown Prince Zhang Zuo was conferred the title posthumously. You are still alive, so this posthumous title is naturally invalid. Now, you are treacherously trying to abdicate and trying to kill the emperor. You deserve to be executed. I have never wanted you to be the crown prince. You are standing in front of me. Do you want to reprimand me for making you the son of a concubine and ruining your glory, splendor, and wealth? Or do you think that you are more capable than Changsheng, that you can govern the world and protect the people? Zixiao is a peerless scholar of the nation. He has taught you in every way, but what have you learned from him? You are so stupid. Other than being used by others and falling headlong into the trap that I have set, what other abilities do you have? You are so stupid. Other than the right to inherit the throne and his identity as a prince, Wei Ci had never wronged this child. In the end, he was called a scoundrel. Chapter 8:18. When Wei Ci woke up again, the sun had already climbed to the top of his head. He could still hear the sound of munching. He turned his head and saw a pile of flour cakes lying on the ground with a plate of snacks by her hand. Flour cakes. No, the chubby Changsheng noticed the movement and turned to look at Wei Ci. Wei Su is awake. Changsheng giggled and was about to get up when her round eyes swept across the crumbs on her hands. She seemed to have thought of something and guiltily turned to kneel. Quietly, she covered the plate of snacks with her buttocks, thinking that Wei Ci would not be able to see it. Wei Ci was speechless. Feng Huayu, if you don't restrain your daughter, she will really go crazy. Changsheng, come here. Wei Ci's voice was very hoarse as he waved at Changsheng. Changsheng got up shyly and pushed the plate of snacks aside with her chubby toes, trying to destroy the evidence. Wei Susu. Wei Ci pinched Changsheng's small hair bun and smiled weakly. Don't eat secretly, lest your father resents me for starving you. Changsheng lowered her head. She was young, but she also knew that she was guilty. She originally wanted to bring it over to share with her friend Wei Susu, but she could not bear the hunger, so she secretly held it and ate it. Unknowingly, there were only scraps left. Coincidentally, Wei Ci woke up at this time and was frightened. Is Wei Susu sick? She slept for a long time. In Wei Ci's mansion, no one else could be considered as the master except for him. Changsheng naturally came and went as she pleased, and the servants did not dare to restrain her. She's not sick, she just doesn't want to get up. Changsheng nodded and made an "oh" sound. She quietly covered her mouth and said, Changsheng doesn't like to get up either, the nanny is bad, every time she wanted to stay in bed, the nanny would always carry her out of bed. Every time this happened, Changsheng would be extremely resentful. Why couldn't she be fatter and heavier so that the nanny could not carry her? Wei Ci laughed involuntarily. He asked the servant to take care of Changsheng while he went to take a bath and wash off the sticky sweat on his body. Only then did he feel refreshed. Your mouth has never been idle all day long. Wei Ci was haunted by nightmares and his breath was weak. He was panting after 2 steps while carrying the heavy Changsheng. Fortunately, the 2 families were not far apart. Otherwise, he would have lost his life. I've really troubled you last night. Changsheng is a stubborn child. I really can't do anything about her. Feng Jin had already come back from work for lunch, so he asked Wei Ci to stay for lunch. The Feng family was strict and did not like to be extravagant. Therefore, the lunch at Feng Jin's house leaned towards a vegetarian diet, which suited Wei Ci's taste. Children are all like this. They like to stick to others. This is their nature. After lunch, Wei Ci regained some energy. Feng Jin did not suspect anything else. He asked, Zixiao, are you also worried about what happened in the morning? Wei Ci was surprised and asked in a daze, what happened in the morning? Everyone's office was not in the same place, and they could not meet each other every day, so Feng Jin did not think that Wei Ci did not go to the government office at all today. About the Wanzhou government. Feng Jin's brows were tightly furrowed. He was rather vexed. The prefecture? Couldn't they just use the original state capital? My lord is not a person who likes to be extravagant, and she will not waste money and manpower just for her own enjoyment. Wei Ci said without thinking, could it be that Huayu has been frowning because of this matter? Feng Jin said, the previous state capital has been burned down by the remnants of the Tsing-Yi army. If we choose that place as the state capital, it will take at least a year for it to take shape. As for Xiaoyu's side, it will cost nearly 1,000,000 taels, not to mention other labor costs. Because of the war in the north, the people of the original state capital had long dispersed. If they rebuilt the state capital there, not only would they have to spend a lot of money, but they would also have to spend a lot of effort to recruit labor. It would be a waste of time and effort. It was not worth it. Moreover, the state capital was similar to the central brain of the entire power, so they could not be careless. Wei Ci furrowed his brows. After thinking deeply for a while, he made a decision. What did my lord say? Feng Jin said, my lord's intention is clear. It will not delay official business and waste money and manpower. As for where to choose, she has no opinion. Wei Ci asked again, what about the others? Feng Jin paused, then said rather awkwardly, the others' opinion. They want to set the state capital in Shangjing. Shangjing? This was the same as Wei Ci's choice. However, looking at Feng Jin's expression, one could tell that he was struggling in his heart. It was not appropriate to set the state capital in Shangjing. Huayu doesn't seem to agree. Wei Ci used a declarative tone. Feng Jin laughed bitterly and said, Shangjing is the capital of Dongqing. If my lord sets the state capital there, I'm afraid it will cause gossip. Moreover, Shangjing experienced a huge earthquake. Every time I go near there, I feel terrified. What happened that year is still vivid in my mind. Back then, the power of the earthquake was too great. How many lives were lost? Even though more than 2 years had passed, every time Feng Jin recalled the scene of that day, he still felt terrified. The imperial court has moved the capital to Qinzhou. Shangjing is no longer the capital. If other people were gossiping, just let them be. His Highness might not take it to heart. Even if there are complaints in the imperial city of Qinzhou, can they remove my lord state magistrate? A disdainful smile appeared at the corner of Wei Ci's mouth. He continued, the earthquake that year destroyed Shangjing. How many people lost their homes? Now that Shangjing is a wasteland, we can't just leave it be. If we make Shangjing the state capital, we can recruit the surrounding refugees and reduce hidden dangers. That's one of the reasons. Secondly, Shangjing is an ancient city after all. Some buildings can still be used. It can reduce expenses. As the former capital, Shangjing had a different meaning. It was the center of the entire Wanzhou. Traffic was accessible from all directions. If it wasn't for Dongqing's emperor occupying it, the state capital of Wanzhou would have been set in Shangjing. Feng Jin sighed and said, I know this is the case, but I'm still afraid. I'm worried that the earthquake will happen again. Wei Ci still had some reasons that he didn't say. There were more than 2 reasons for setting the state capital in Shangjing. There was another more important reason. The local gentry in Shangyang County were too arrogant. The Feng family didn't manage things, and the others were even more unscrupulous. Jiang Pengji had been staying in Fengyi County and couldn't keep an eye on these demons all the time. They had more opportunities to cause trouble. If the state capital was set in what used to be Shangjing, the gentry in Shangyang County would naturally be quiet and wouldn't dare to act rashly. Whether it was in his previous or current life, Wei Ci knew that his lord would definitely fight with the aristocratic families. Even if his lord was from an aristocratic family, she wouldn't be merciful. Wei Ci only felt a headache when he thought of the struggles after the establishment of the Jiang dynasty. Restraining the authority of the aristocratic families couldn't wait until the country was unified. If possible, he had to suppress them now. Chapter 8:19. Have you all decided to set the capital in Shangjing? Jiang Pengji felt that her subordinates had their own ideas. They had unanimously decided to rebuild Shangjing. They were all up to no good. Jiang Pengji was not the only one who thought that way. Even the viewers in the streaming room thought that they were up to no good. Under normal circumstances, she would broadcast live from 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening. Many viewers said that now that the live streaming industry was so developed, there was only one host in the world who was as dedicated and hardworking as she was and never cheated the audience. The only problem was that there was a limit to the number of viewers in the streaming room. Every time they watched the stream, they had to compete on their speed and luck. The streaming room only had a maximum of 150,000 viewers, but there were 5 to 6 billion people who knew about it. Jiang Pengji's streaming room was renowned all over the world. As a matter of fact, when she asked this question, countless bullet screens floated across the live broadcast screen. Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan, streamer, you're playing with fire. After watching yesterday's video, I felt that something was going to happen. If the capital is set in Shangjing, won't everyone know what Sima Zhao is up to? Xinjia, it should be changed. Everyone knows what Lu Lanting's intentions are. Hu Xianhongyan, what a pity. I really want to see what the little emperor and empress dowager's faces will look like if the streamer sets the capital in Shangjing. Bubbles dream, TSK. What else can they look like? They'll look like they drank a vat of yellow sh** tea, chinchio booby, wretch. Your analogy is disgusting. I'm having lunch in the company's cafeteria. Most of the viewers in the streaming room were cheering for Jiang Pengji and her subordinates. With the royal family still around, they had the guts to build the capital in what used to be the capital. What did that mean? A viewer's bullet screen was very vivid. Some are departing Xianggu, the streamer is up to no good. It's like the man eloping with his sister-in-law and concubine, leaving his wife sleeping on the bed. Not long after, a group of powerful bandits came, occupied the mansion, and slept with the man's wife. Even if this first wife was a woman that the male master didn't want, if she was taken by a second stranger, how could his expression be good? In addition to these jesting bullet screens, there were also a few weird bullet screens floating in the corner of the live broadcast screen. Hua hua hao nan shui, I don't care about anything else. I just want to know when the host will let go of her racial prejudice and open up other languages. Weigoran Shuahua, in order to follow the live stream, I studied hard for 3 years and passed level 10 of Mandarin, but there are still many things I don't understand. In this regard, Jiang Pengji spread her hands. She was also very helpless. The system had already been imprisoned by her, so there was no way for her to level up the live stream. Speaking up to this point, he had to add that for some reason, the live stream had to be logged in using the Chinese network. Even the bullet screen was limited to the Chinese input method. As a result, many foreigners had to travel all the way to China to watch the live broadcast. Otherwise, they could only climb over the wall to watch the recorded broadcast on the internet. Even when he came to China, he still had to learn the Chinese language if he wanted to send a bullet screen message and understand what the host was saying. The more he said, the more tears there would be. Jiang Pengji silently sympathized with the audience. Her subordinates exchanged glances and chose one of them to speak on behalf of her. Feng Jin listed in detail the benefits of setting the provincial government in Shangjing. Everything he did was based on Jiang Pengji's interests. He had no other selfish motives. After his impassioned speech, Feng Jin hesitantly added, Shangjing was attacked by the earthquake. 9 out of 10 buildings collapsed. If we rebuild it on top of the ruined city, I'm afraid we have to be extra careful. During the construction, we have to use sufficient materials. There must be no corruption or shoddy work. I think it's better to hire an experienced master craftsman to personally supervise the construction, design, and make overall plans. Only then can we comfort the people who have suffered from the earthquake. An earthquake had taken the lives of tens of thousands of people in a city. Even if such a dangerous place was rebuilt, the people would still have lingering fears. If they wanted to attract the refugees to come closer, they had to let them know that the rebuilt buildings were sturdy and not afraid of the earthquake. More importantly, Jiang Pengji turned her gaze to Zhang Ping. Shiheng, do you know how to do this? The other party was stunned for a moment. He immediately smiled bitterly and said, "It's not difficult for Ping to build a house and a room. I'm afraid it's beyond my ability to build a city." Jiang Pengji said nonchalantly, "It's not that troublesome to build a city. You just need to know how to build a house. As long as you copy and paste a house thousands of times, won't it be a city? Piling up the city walls and building the city walls, won't the prototype be there? As for the drainage system, you can check how the water pipes in Xiangyang district are laid and how the drainage system is drained. You can also learn a thing or two from it." Everyone was dumbfounded. Listening to their lord's words, it seemed that building a city was very simple. They could guess what copy was literally, but what the hell was paste? Jiang Pengji expressed that this question was a little profound. She should hire Tang Qi, who the live stream viewers had been complaining about recently, to explain. Zhang Ping was forced to do something beyond his ability. He immediately jumped up and down like a thunderclap. Wei Ci, who was beside him, noticed his dilemma and said softly, "I have a few maps of the ancient city here. Maybe they'll be helpful to you." When Zhang Ping heard that, he was suddenly enlightened. He felt that he had found a strong backer. He decisively stepped out and dragged his friend Wei Ci into the fire pit without another word. "My lord, I want to borrow someone from you." Jiang Pengji said with a smile, "It's better to build the prefecture as soon as possible. Now is the time to cultivate and recuperate. Other matters are not busy, so naturally, I have to make way for this matter. Tell me, who do you want to borrow? As long as it's within my means, I'll try my best to fulfill your request." Zhang Ping bowed with folded hands and said, "My lord, please lend me Zixiao. Zixiao is erudite and multi-talented. He has dabbled in the 5 elements, 8 trigrams, and Qimen Duanjia. He has also been particular about architecture, and he's also good at calligraphy and painting. If I can get Zixiao's help, I think I'll be able to draw the map of the prefecture very soon." Wei Ci was speechless. "I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it." He kindly lent out the precious map and tried to help his friend, but this stupid teammate directly pulled him into the fire pit. He was furious. Did this guy think that the map of a city was so easy to draw? Jiang Pengji saw Wei Ci's expression of wanting to say something but hesitated. She couldn't help but curl the corners of her lips and say, "As you say." Zhang Ping was overjoyed and hurriedly thanked her. "Thank you, my lord." Wei Ci was by Zhang Ping's side. He silently chuckled. He really wanted to beat the cheater beside him to death. The others who were not named heaved a long sigh of relief. They had escaped. They were not stupid. Even if they had not done it before, they knew how tiring it was to build a city. Working overtime was not considered tough, but they were afraid of living in the construction site all year round. Everyone could not hide in time. Only one person did not know the inside story. He foolishly stepped out and volunteered. This person was Xiao Guang. No matter what, he was an otaku who practiced the way of Moism. There would always be many similarities with the way of architecture. Moreover, he was unusually curious about the drainage route of Xiangyang district. He planned to take advantage of this opportunity to understand the core technology. Chapter 820. Building a city required an on-the-spot investigation, measurement of the land, and a clear understanding of the situation before starting to design and draw the blueprint. Wei Ci knew that he had been tricked by Zhang Ping, his useless teammate. He would not have any leisure time in the future. Before heading to Shangjing, Wei Xiai secretly looked for Jiang Pengji. The two of them had a secret conversation. Only they knew about the content of the conversation. "My lord, I would like to ask you something disrespectful. What are your ambitions?" Wei Xiai was a rather rational person. After 2 days of adjustment, he had recovered from the nightmare that night. He looked like nothing had happened. He talked about official matters without any personal emotions. Jiang Pengji and Wei Xiai chose a secluded place to talk. The surroundings were empty, so they were not afraid of being eavesdropped. Even if the walls had ears, Jiang Pengji would discover it immediately because no one in the world could hide from her mental investigation. "Where are my ambitions?" she murmured and said with a smile. "Naturally, my ambitions are for the world and the people. Zixiao and I are connected and have the same aspirations. If you have anything to say, just say it directly. There's no need to sound me out. As long as it's from you, I will listen carefully." Wei Xi's cheeks were hot and his ears were bloodshot. Jiang Pengji always said such misleading things. Even if Wei Xiai had been through hundreds of battles, he still could not resist. He collected his wandering thoughts and returned to normal. He said seriously, "My lord, my ambitions are not only for the world and the people, but also for the country to prosper and for the world to be peaceful. Now that the world is in chaos, countless people have suffered from this disaster. They have to leave their homes and become destitute. They have lost their homes and land. There are even countless people who sell their children to survive. Everyone knows that the world will be divided after being united for a long time, and united after being divided for a long time. A country has its ups and downs. The prosperity of the country is due to the wisdom of the king and the virtuous officials. Only then can the weather be favorable and the people live and work in peace. However, why does the country decline? Is it because the king is muddle-headed and the officials are mediocre? There are only a few reasons for the prosperity of the country, but what about the decline of the country? Is it because the king is muddle-headed, the officials are mediocre, and the weather is not good? Wei Xiai had been thinking about this question since he was young in his previous life. He had been thinking about it until now. Wei Xiai had always admired Jiang Pengji, not only because what she did was his ideal, but also because of another reason. She was the light on his lost path, guiding him to uncover many questions that confused him. If any one of these problems were to be mentioned, it would probably cause a huge uproar and cause all the scholars in the world to condemn him. Wei Xiai was aware of the danger, but he did not feel lonely or helpless, because he knew that there were still people walking on the same path as him. Xiai flipped through the historical records and discovered that the decline of the country was not only a phenomenon from top to bottom, but also from bottom to top. If the country was compared to a towering tree, the ruler was the crown, and the officials were the branches, then the common people were the roots that extended all the way to the ground. If the crown of the tree died, the tree could still survive. If the branches were damaged, the trunk could still grow. However, if a large part of the root system is damaged, the tree will be in danger. Jiang Pengji listened attentively. She could feel that he had his own understanding of this. He was neither reading from a book nor theorizing on paper. Wei Xiai continued, "Soil is the root of the tree, it is the foundation that nurtures them. If the soil is taken away, the tree's roots will not survive." Jiang Pengji's expression turned solemn. She understood what Wei Xiai meant. "You said land annexation?" Wei Xi's expression tightened. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Exactly. What was land annexation? Nowadays, land could be bought and sold. The aristocratic families, the country gentry, and the bureaucrats could borrow power and money to get more and more land from the hands of the peasants. They could even make the peasants have no apprentices. If they were despicable, they could even seize it by force. This phenomenon was especially obvious in a disaster year. Once the common people lost their land, it meant that they had lost something to rely on for survival. They could only continue to sell their properties, become cheap labor, and become tenant farmers for the big landlords. In this era, this was a stubborn disease that was difficult to cure, and it would become more and more serious. Once land annexation reached a certain level, the country would also go on the path of decline. Even if there was a ruler who could revive the country, it would not be able to save the dynasty. As land annexation became more and more intense, there would be an irreconcilable conflict between the peasants and the tyrants who owned a large amount of land. There would also be intense friction between the country and these tyrants. Looking at the historical records, many kings who were clear and bright would take measures to curb the pace of land annexation, so that the land annexation could be alleviated to a certain extent. If it could not be alleviated, then there would inevitably be a problem. The peasants would raise their hoes and rebel. Jiang Pengji came from the future. The entire universe was an area that humans had explored. Because of the interstellar war and people's thoughts, the speed of population reproduction could not keep up with the speed of expansion. For intelligent creatures, the entire universe was boundless. They had a wider space and endless unknown territory to explore. But it was different in ancient times. Human technology was backward, and their productivity was low. They were bound by the land invisibly, and it was difficult for them to break free. For them, the land was a piece of cake. If others got more, they would get less. There was a conflict of interest between them. The source of human war was the struggle for interests. In ancient times, it was traced back to the struggle for land. Not to mention this dimension, the audience in the streaming room also had the problem of land annexation. In the history of Hua country, successive dynasties had passed laws to adjust the governance of land annexation, and the land reform had been carried out step by step. The equal field system, the whip law, and the distribution of men to the mu were all the same. Jiang Pengji disliked kneeling and sitting uncomfortable, so she simply changed her posture and leaned against the table. Go on, I'm listening. Wei Ci felt his heart beating like a drum. He could still hear the powerful vibration coming from the left side of his chest. He knew he was nervous. My lord, in my opinion, why don't we eliminate the source of land annexation from the root? As soon as he said this, Wei Ci felt his whole body lose its strength. He was only waiting for Jiang Pengji to express her opinion. Jiang Pengji asked, eliminate the source? Wei Ci did not say anything else. He only said 8 words, all the land under the heavens belongs to the king. Jiang Pengji was shocked. She looked up and met Wei Ci's eyes. She saw the determination in his eyes. After a while, she smiled happily. Okay, I got it. All the land under the heavens belongs to the king. She liked this sentence. Not only did she like this sentence, but she also seemed to like the person who said it. Zixiao, come here. She waved at Wei Ci. His face turned from pale to rosy. When he heard her call, a trace of hesitation flashed in his eyes. However, Wei Ci never knew what no meant when facing Jiang Pengji. He walked forward on his knees. The distance between them was less than 10 inches. Jiang Pengji suddenly grabbed his hand. Wei Ci was so shocked that he almost jumped up. Don't be afraid. I won't eat you. Wei Ci secretly revealed a bitter smile. She indeed wouldn't eat him, but to him, it might be more frightening than being eaten. Zixiao's filial piety is with me. Wei Ci widened his eyes in shock. His eyes, which contained all the stars in the universe, were so bright that it was dazzling. The audience in the streaming room who was watching the whole process, burp. Chapter 8:21. Hua Luo Han Yen Bo, burp, oh my god, this mouthful of dog food is making me bloated. Who gave me a glass of water? I choked on it. Free lemon, the streamer's hooliganism is getting richer and richer. Looking at the situation, it won't be long before he gets the beauty. Host, Bao Bao still has a lot of love books and magic weapons to win. I guarantee that you will be more overbearing than an overbearing president. Although Jiang Pengji had never revealed anything, the audience in the streaming room were not naive and innocent. Wasn't there a good saying, you haven't seen a pig run, but you haven't eaten pork? Although 99% of the audience in the live broadcast room were single dogs, they had grown up watching countless Mary Sue romance dramas. They were even more familiar with the related online novels. They had seen many storms and waves, so what kind of tricks had they not seen to flirt with men and girls? They dared to swear on the dog food in their arms that the streamer must have taken a fancy to Beauty C's unparalleled beauty. Not only did he fancy his face and covet his body, but he also wanted to dominate his soul. If not for the fact that they could not defeat him, they really wanted to carry Wei Ci away and declare their sovereignty. When Jiang Pengji saw the 150,000 incompetent military advisors trying to teach her how to conquer the city, she couldn't help but think of the blunder from before. Her brows twitched. Host V, when you single dogs can use these strategies to get rid of your single status, then recommend them to me. If he wasn't single, he probably wouldn't have so much time to spend in the live broadcast room, right? Jiang Pengji's words hit the audience's sore spot. That hurts, host. Countless people who loved single people expressed their condemnation. We're single dogs and not protected animals. Some are departing Xianggu. I'm secretly cursing the streamer. I hope you won't be able to get rid of your single status. Dong Kai Kai Jia, don't be too proud of yourself, streamer. In my opinion, there seems to be some conflict between Beauty Ci and the streamer. Whether it's the first time they met or now, Beauty Ci seems to be quite resistant to the streamer's approach. Every time, she is like a frightened rabbit, wanting to jump 3 feet high. Some time ago, she went to the Tieba forum to review the exciting videos from the past few years. She found that Ci Maren did not resist others coming into contact with her, except for the host. Jiang Pengji poked their sore spot, so naturally, the audience in the streaming room would respond with a tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye. With someone's reminder, many people also figured out that something was wrong. They had never heard of any conflict between the streamer and Wei Ci. Why was the latter always resisting the former? With this question in mind, many people simply let their imagination run wild. The conclusion they came up with made Jiang Pengji not know whether to laugh or cry. Ningji, you die so miserably, maybe there's some kind of conspiracy. For example, does Beauty Ci have ulterior motives towards the host? As soon as this conspiracy theory was put forth, it was immediately shot down. Liangpin Puzi, that's impossible. If Samiran really has an ulterior motive for the streamer, he must be out of his mind to say to the streamer, everything under the heavens belongs to him. What's more, don't you know what kind of person the host is? I am firmly on Ci Mei's side. Other than conspiracy theories, there were other wild guesses, such as, fragrant spicy squid slices, Beauty Ci is a reserved person after all. The streamer is so bold and flirtatious. It must be scary. Hongagate raisin, Simei is a rabbit, and the streamer is a tiger. How can a rabbit not be afraid of a tiger? Looking at the heated discussion in the streaming room, Jiang Pengji did not join in. Instead, she carefully thought about what Wei Ci had said. Under the premise of limited land resources, land annexation was a headache for all dynasties. According to Wei Ci, instead of wasting effort to slow down the process of land annexation, it was better to cut it off from the root. Since it was said that everything under the heavens belongs to the king, then wouldn't it be justifiable for all land to belong to the country? However, Jiang Pengji could jump out of the fence, but it did not mean that others could. Not to mention Wei Ci, who was a talented person who was well-read, even an illiterate street gangster would not be willing to do so. In this era, land was not just land, it was also a treasure bowl that could produce wealth. As long as one could climb up and become a person above others, it would be justifiable to take more treasure bowls into one's pocket. To put it bluntly, this was about benefits. Once the land was returned to the country, not only would the rich and poor jump up and down, even the ordinary people would not agree to it. If the land belonged to the country, how could they feel at ease? The people would not think about the long-term future. They would only care about the benefits in front of them. Jiang Pengji dared to return the land to the country. In the eyes of the people, she had snatched away the foundation that they relied on to make a living from their hands. If the people were like that, it was needless to say for the aristocratic families that sat on countless fertile lands. Those who struggled bitterly and tried to make a name for themselves would oppose it even more. Jiang Pengji understood these principles, and Wei Xiai understood them even more. However, understanding did not mean that he could not do it, it depended on how he did it. Wei Xiai was sacrificing his own future benefits when he proposed this to Jiang Pengji. Aside from Wei Xiai, who else could do this calmly? This is really a difficult problem for me. Although it was difficult, it was not without hope. If it was in the era when the country was unified and the concept of land belonging to the country was raised, all the people in the world would rise up in revolt. However, it was a chaotic world now. The land that Jiang Pengji conquered and cultivated, as long as she did not sell it, was all hers in name. For example, the order to station land was actually renting land from the government to the landless people to farm, and the government would take a cut from it. To be honest, this action was quite a hooligan. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a bandit. Nowadays, whoever had the bigger fist was the boss. If they were not happy, they could fight it out. The land belonged to the government, not the people who farmed it. Jiang Pengji frowned and thought deeply. Originally, it was only a plan to station land to alleviate the urgent situation and settle the refugees. Now it can be implemented for a long time, and let the people have the concept of public ownership of land. I must let the people know that leasing land is far more secure than privately owned land. If that's the case, the scale of station land has to be expanded, and the proportion of food taken by the government has to be reduced accordingly. One could not become fat in one bite, and there was no good thing that could be achieved overnight in this world. If Jiang Pengji wanted to take away the cake from the aristocratic families and the powerful officials, she must have strong means and strength. One was the army, and the other was the people. Before the dagger was revealed, she not only had to strengthen herself, but she also had to quietly weaken the power that suppressed the aristocratic families and the powerful officials. I am strong, and the enemy is weak. With this, we might be able to fight in the future. However, before her personal strength reached a certain level, she and Wei Xiai could not reveal this idea to avoid being criticized by the world. Even if the land reform was successful, there would be a series of problems later on. Chapter 822. Once the power in one's hands grew, one's private interests and desires would also grow. Would the royal family be able to guarantee fairness and impartiality? Would every generation of emperors serve the country and the people? Who could guarantee that this would prevent land annexation? For their own selfish interests, people's brains would become quite smart. Even the Federation's sky brain was amazed by this kind of intelligence. The landlord class would always make a comeback with another identity. What would they do then? Jiang Pengji let out a long sigh. There were still many things to consider. Wei Xiai, on the other hand, was relaxed. He had thrown such a big problem to her and refused to stay to continue the discussion. It would be good to stay and have a meal together. Elsewhere, Wei Xiai returned home with a bellyful of thoughts. He happened to run into Zhang Ping, who was looking for him. Shiheng has caused me to suffer this time, Wei Xiai smiled bitterly. Zhang Ping was a classic example of a bad teammate. This time, he was really screwed over. However, so be it. At least he could temporarily stay away from the center of power in Wanzhou. When Wei Xiai thought of Jiang Pengji's actions just now, he felt even more uneasy. He did not understand. What did she want to do? Although he did not understand, Wei Xiai felt that it was not wrong for the two of them to distance themselves for a while. This will not happen again. Zhang Ping smiled awkwardly. Fortunately, Wei Xiai was just grumbling and not angry. After all, the two of them had been close friends for many years. Screwing over once or twice was just to cultivate their relationship. Zixiao, I'll do it this time. Next time, I won't drag you down. Zhang Ping was there to collect the drawings. With the drawings as a specimen, he could have a deeper understanding. Wei Ci secretly rolled his eyes. He did not believe in Zhang Ping's attributes at all. Previously, Zhang Ping had said that Wei Ci was knowledgeable and multi-talented. Not only did he dabble in the 5 elements and 8 trigrams, Qimen Duanjia, but he also worked on architectural design. He was good at calligraphy and painting, and he knew everything. Zhang Ping was not bragging. Wei Ci really knew these things. His level of attainment was not low. If not, Master Yuanjing would not have pestered him for so many years. Wei Ci went to the study to retrieve a few scrolls of drawings. The paper used was the best bamboo paper. Bamboo paper, Zixiao, did you draw this? Zhang Ping noticed that Wei Ci was holding a huge piece of silk cloth with patterns drawn on it, as well as an exquisite framed picture scroll. The original drawing is on the silk cloth. The previous owner did not preserve it well and insects grew on it. I almost couldn't tell what it looked like. Wei Ci's drawings were taken from the ancestral home of the Wei family in Langia. Even though the Wei family had fallen from grace, their ancestors were once illustrious. Naturally, they did not lack good things. Look, no matter how much I preserve it, it can't be restored to its original state. I might as well make a copy of the original drawing. You can just look at the sample. Zhang Ping made an "oh" sound and unfolded the large stack of paintings that Wei Ci had carefully stored. The paper of these scrolls had obviously been carefully cut. They were of different lengths and widths. Some were 8 or 9 inches, while others were more than 10 inches. Most of the cities in the blueprint were built during the golden age of the Great Xia dynasty. Be it the layout or the architecture, they were all majestic. Most of these buildings were uniaxial symmetrical, which perfectly satisfied the obsessive-compulsive disorder. Of course, it was easy to get lost in such a city. The more complicated ones, such as the capital cities and prefectures, mostly used symmetrical secondary tests, and the chances of getting lost were higher. Apart from these mainstream designs, there were also quite a few irregular designs. Most of them evolved from the gradual expansion of villages. With the materials, Zhang Ping felt a little more confident in his heart. At this moment, Wei Ci opened his mouth and interrupted his inspiration. Shangjing suffered an earthquake, and the terrain has undergone a huge change. If we follow the book and imitate it, I'm afraid it won't work. Jiang Pengji said calmly, this is the original design of Shangjing. The buildings are scattered in picturesque disorder, and they are indeed majestic and beautiful. But you have to think about our Lord's temperament. She won't spend too much money to build such a luxurious prefectures for herself. Zhang Ping respected Wei Ci's opinion very much. He asked, Zixiao, what do you mean? Wei Ci thought about it and said, make it as simple as possible. Make it as convenient as possible. There's no need to deliberately pursue symmetry and beauty. As long as it suits the terrain and reduces manpower, it's fine. Of course, although it's said that building a house is simple, it doesn't mean that the materials used are random. It's only been a few years since the earthquake in Shangjing. The people still have lingering fears when they think about it. The house would rather be simple, but it has to be stable. Zhang Ping thought about it and it seemed to make sense. He had followed Jiang Pengji for a period of time. She indeed did not like to be extravagant. Her style was capable and simple. If the city was built according to the model map, it would take a lot of manpower and time. Let's not talk about the distant cities. Let's talk about what used to be Shangjing City. This city took 160,000 people a whole 8 years to build. It was majestic and beautiful, but it was a waste of money, manpower, and time. If Zhang Ping dared to present such a plan to Jiang Pengji, he would definitely be taught a lesson. First, build mud houses and plan the streets of the city. It doesn't need to be beautiful. It just needs to be able to shelter from the sun and the moon, and protect against the wind and rain. Zhang Ping was speechless. He was wrong. He thought that his lord's copy and paste was child's play. He did not expect that the real child's play was Wei Ci. Wouldn't that kind of house be a disgrace to my lord's status? If there was a table, Zhang Ping would slap it loudly. Wei Ci smiled and said, "Fame is a worldly possession. It's unimportant. My lord won't care about this." Zhang Ping could not help but secretly criticize him. "Do you think you're my lord? How can you know what she's thinking?" For many people, houses and clothes are their pride. If it's too simple and crude, where can they put their pride? Of course, Zhang Ping did not dare to say these words out loud. If he accidentally angered his friends, Wei Ci would just leave such a huge project on him. Zhang Ping would cry until he was blind. Most houses in ancient times were made of wood. It was unknown how much wood was used to build a mansion. It was fine if there were many trees around, but if there were none, they could only travel far away to buy them. It was a waste of time and energy. Fortunately, with the green bricks and green tiles, the amount of wood needed for houses was greatly reduced. Even so, it was still an astronomical figure. Zhang Ping hoped to use local materials so that they could save a lot of transportation costs. However, Jiang Pengji calculated the approximate figure and frowned quietly. There are indeed many forests in Shangjing, but if too many trees are cut down, it's easy to cause landslides and cracks. When she said that, Zhang Ping was shocked. Was it that scary? In the past, he had heard that when the mountain god was angry, the mountain would collapse and the sand would roll down when thunderstorms occurred. But were the two related? Let's do it this way. We'll use local materials for 30% of the wood. For every tree we cut down, we must plant 3 saplings. The remaining 70% of the wood will be purchased from the nearby Shenyang County. The gentry families in Shenyang County also deal in wood. They can't ask for more than such a big business. Let Xiaoyu discuss this matter. As for the green bricks and green tiles, I'll write a warrant for you. You can pick a few skilled brickmakers. Chapter 823. Lingxiao Hall in the Heavens and Shenyang Palace in the Mortal World. Shenyang Palace was not only the palace of Dongqing, but also the place where the rich and powerful gathered. Back then, Shangjing City and Shenyang Palace were so prosperous. Now there are only ruins. There seems to be people in the distance. Wei Ci lifted the curtain and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He looked at the ruins in front of him that were overgrown with weeds and vines. He was filled with emotion. It was already midsummer. The scorching sun hung high above their heads, scorching their skin. No matter what, it is Shangjing, a treasured place where the rich and powerful gathered. When the earthquake happened suddenly, many houses collapsed and were buried in the ruins. Refugees gathered here, searching for money under the ruins to make a living. Therefore, scattered villages slowly formed around it. Zhang Ping was dressed in a brown sackcloth and his long hair was tied up with a cloth. If it was not for his scholarly aura, one might think he was an ordinary farmer. He took a bamboo hat from the carriage and gave it to Wei Ci to shade him from the sun. Let's investigate first and then make a decision. Shangjing City used to have a floating population of 200,000 to 300,000, but now it had become ruins where no one could be seen. In just over 2 years, wildly growing vines covered the ruins. Occasionally, a few rats could be seen shuttling around. Wei Ci and Zhang Ping brought over 10,000 laborers. The remaining manpower was planned to be recruited locally, taking the opportunity to absorb refugees and reduce hidden dangers. The two spent a few days walking around Shangjing City and the nearby mountains, familiarizing themselves with the surrounding terrain and replanning the layout of the city. Wei Ci's memory was excellent and he had a photographic memory. In just a few days, he memorized the surrounding terrain and drew them on paper. After some discussion, the two compared the original layout of Shangjing City and made some improvements and adjustments to the layout of the state capital. I really wondered if there is anything in this world that you can't do. Zhang Ping came back from outside. His exposed cheeks and neck were scorched black and red by the scorching sun. His clothes were soaked in sweat, dry and wet, wet and dry again. After a busy day outside, Zhang Ping was so thirsty that his throat was about to emit smoke. When he returned, he gulped down a mouthful of water. He saw a huge piece of bamboo paper on Wei Si's table. On it, a plan of a city was drawn with fine charcoal. As for why Wei Si wanted to use the trimmed charcoal to draw, Zhang Ping did not ask since Wei Si answered so quickly. There is a limit to one's strength, and the will of the heavens cannot be changed. Si is just an ordinary person, there are still many things that I don't know how to do. Wei Si smiled as he carefully rolled up the finished product and put it away. He took out another roll of paper from the side and slowly unrolled it. Compared to the previous drawing that seemed to be drawn with a ruler, this drawing was much more casual. These are the villages, mountains, and forests near the old site of Shangjing City. The soil in these places is quite sticky and suitable for making green bricks. There are also villages gathered nearby, and they add up to 1,000 people. We will recruit the people nearby and have them build a direct road to Shangjing. The amount of wood, stone, and sand needed to build the city is huge. We can't just use them in one place. The materials used to build the city weren't expensive, but the transportation costs were. Wei Si calculated carefully and decided to spend manpower to build the main road first. Once everything was ready, he would start building the city. As big as Shangjing was, the ruins of the entire city still had to be carefully cleared out. Those that could be reused would be reused to save costs, and those that could not be reused would be disposed of. Zhang Ping casually waved his hand and said, "You can decide." Wei Si's expression froze, and he looked at Zhang Ping with some hidden bitterness. People like Zhang Ping were described as pig-headed teammates. Under the scorching sun, Zhang Ping and the others were sweating profusely. Their immediate superior, Jiang Pengji, was holding a watermelon and chatting with Ching Ching. The watermelon production was limited, and most of it was supplied to meritorious subordinates. The rest was thrown to the guest house and sold to the customers. With Jiang Pengji's support, the official restaurant, the guest house, had been opened all over Wanzhou. There was one in every county in the territory. With new dishes and management methods, it quickly gained a foothold in the local area. According to Jiang Pengji's instructions, the guest house took the medium to high-end route. The recipes of ordinary home-cooked dishes were released to the people for free, so that the guest house wouldn't clash with the restaurants opened by the people and steal their rice bowls. The more guest houses opened, the more jobs they could provide, and the more disabled soldiers or the relatives of the deceased could be settled. When had the people ever seen such a novel fruit as watermelon? For a while, the business of the guest houses improved a lot, and the daily net profits were constantly rising. Jiang Pengji ate the watermelon while looking at the accounts sent by the various guest houses. The guest house's business is good, but the profits aren't good. Ching Cheng's wife was in charge of the internal affairs. She didn't know much about the business, but she knew that the restaurant didn't make much money. Jiang Pengji looked at the accounts and felt a little satisfied. The managers of the guest houses were smart enough not to cheat on the accounts, so it didn't take her long to finish reading. How can a big city like Wanzhou rely on the guest house's business to maintain its expenses? It doesn't matter how much profit it makes. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "The guest house was established to give the disabled soldiers a place to go, and the orphans and parents of the deceased a place to rely on. It doesn't matter if it makes money or not. What's important is that it can reassure the people. When the soldiers see that their families are properly settled, they can also rest assured on the battlefield. If we don't settle them down properly, first, it will chill the hearts of the soldiers, and second, it will force these people from good citizens to become refugees. Mr. Cheng is more knowledgeable than me, so you should know what kind of situation it will be when there are more refugees. How many bandits were born as refugees? What was the difference between refugees and refugees in ancient times? Wherever there were more refugees, social security would be poor, and crimes would occur every few days. Stealing and fighting were considered minor, but what was scary was breaking into houses to rob, kill, or kill women and children. Such cases were not uncommon. Why was Wanzhou stable? It wasn't because the number of refugees had decreased, but because more and more refugees had been granted amnesty and returned to their homes and fields. Qingqing listened to Jiang Pengji's words and thought for a while, then an idea flashed in his mind. He said, "Is it possible that the governor built the provincial government for this reason?" Qingqing originally thought that Jiang Pengji spent money to build the provincial government for her own enjoyment, but later felt that it was unlikely. Now that he heard her say this, Qingqing suddenly understood. Spending a huge amount of money to build the provincial government was secondary. The real purpose was to provide a large number of jobs and attract refugees to work there. In the minds of many people, forced labor was free physical labor that could easily lead to death, so no one was willing to do it. But Jiang Pengji had set a precedent by using paid labor to attract people to work there. Chapter 8:24. Qingqing calculated silently in his heart. He had to admit that the young governor in front of him was really good at accounting. In the eyes of outsiders, labor was free, but Jiang Pengji paid the workers. That was a stupid move. Was that the truth? Qingqing didn't think so. Jiang Pengji seemed to be at a disadvantage, but she was actually taking advantage of everything. Young people nowadays are really shameful. Qingqing sighed. The girl in front of him was a few years younger than his youngest son, but she was ahead of everyone else. Jiang Pengji said humbly, "You flatter me, Mr. Cheng. I still have a lot of things I don't understand and need your guidance." Qingqing smiled and waved his hand. "I'm old and useless. I only hope that I can live the rest of my life in peace." Jiang Pengji smiled and said nothing, but she snorted coldly in her heart. If Qingqing was the kind of person who preferred stability, he wouldn't be so troublesome. Speaking of troublemakers, the person in front of her was also a troublemaker. What was Qingqing doing? This person spent a lot of time and finally came up with a way to use different patterns to punctuate sentences. In fact, most scholars had their own habits of reading sentences, and they often used small symbols that they were used to mark sentences. On this basis, Qingqing proposed to use a unified symbol to punctuate sentences. At present, he was worried about what pattern to use. Since it was a symbol used to punctuate sentences, the symbol naturally couldn't be too complicated, but it couldn't be without a symbol. He scratched his head and thought of several patterns, but he was not satisfied with them, so he looked for Jiang Pengji and asked her to give him some suggestions. Seeing the pattern that Qingqing sent, the audience in the streaming room exploded before Jiang Pengji could come up with any ideas. "Yu Jinxiang, oh my god, is this the ancient version of punctuation? But other than the dot and circle, I can't recognize anything else." Qingqing gave a variety of symbol designs. The simpler ones, such as solid black D and hollow circle, and the more complicated ones were similar to the oracle bone script. The former was considered simple, but the latter was cumbersome and complicated. Jiang Pengji looked at it carefully, but she still felt that the patterns were too complicated and not concise. She was straightforward. Qingqing heaved a long sigh and said, "It's indeed complicated. If it's used for writing, it looks gaudy and affects the beauty of the paper. Some of the diagrams are too large, and they are not simple to use. This matter is really worrying." Qingqing was extremely worried, and the audience in the live broadcast room suddenly became excited. They felt that punctuation could be used. If they could see familiar punctuation in the live broadcast room, they would feel a sense of accomplishment. "Li Wushuang, streamer, let me introduce something good to you. Our punctuation marks here are pretty good." The audience in the streaming room was enthusiastic, and Jiang Pengji had the same intention. She took out a new piece of paper and pretended to think for a moment. Then she picked up a pen and drew a dot and a line. Qingqing looked at it carefully. "What is the meaning of this, my lord? I thought that the words we learned today are made up of dots and lines. Since you want to create symbols to punctuate sentences, why don't you evolve it on this basis?" Jiang Pengji drew and wrote at the same time. Ching Cheng's eyes gradually lit up, as if he had received great inspiration. According to what my lord said, a dot and a line can be used. Ching Cheng thought about it and drew a small circle on the paper with a pen. It was a full stop that the audience was familiar with. Such a small circle is concise and clear. If the blank space in the middle is painted, it will look different. Jiang Pengji said with a smile, exactly. You can also add a stroke to the black dot. It's also simple and easy to remember. She drew a comma. The black dot had a tail hanging from it, and it looked like a tadpole. The pattern was not big, and the image was concise and to the point. It was indeed easier to remember than the pattern that Ching Cheng had just come up with. Ching Cheng was suddenly enlightened. Inspiration swarmed in, and he hurriedly extended his creation on this basis. Jiang Pengji guided him from the side, and in a short while, she came up with a few basic symbols. Every time one was added, the bullet screen in the live broadcast room became lively as if it was a festival. They did not witness the birth of the symbol, but they witnessed the entire process of the symbol growing from nothing to something in another dimension. It was a great sense of accomplishment. The person who was more excited than the audience in the live broadcast room was Ching Cheng. The pattern in front of him was very simple, but in his eyes, it was a rare treasure. With symbols, it was natural to give these symbols meaning. Jiang Pengji pointed at the full stop and said, "A circle is a circle. Why don't you use this pattern to end it?" Ching Cheng nodded and immediately made a mark near the full stop. He pointed at the comma and said, "According to what my lord said, this symbol has the intention of extending. Why don't you use it to stop?" Jiang Pengji agreed with Ching Cheng's suggestion. After all, the comma was originally used to stop sentences. After discussing for the whole afternoon, Ching Cheng's spirits were still high. His eyes were shining. When Ching Cheng returned home, not to mention his wife, even his youngest son and daughter could see the joy on their father's face. "Father, what good thing happened to you? Why are you so happy?" Qing Yuan had been tired all day in the government office. He felt that his arm did not belong to him. He did not know why his father was so happy. There were so many things happening in Wanzhou that it was scary. When Qing Yuan was buried by the documents, he also felt a little remorseful. Why did he walk right into the trap? Qing smiled and stroked his beard. He said, "Naturally, it's because there's been progress on the sentence reading." "Really?" Qing Yuan knew why his father had been worried recently. Because of this, he had not been able to sleep well all night. Now that there was a breakthrough, as his son, Qing Yuan was naturally happy for his father from the bottom of his heart. "Of course it's true." Qing glanced at his son and said with some disdain, "There's no end to learning. You have to work hard." In the beginning, Qing was quite satisfied with the knowledge of his two sons, but compared to Jiang Pengji, he felt that he despised everything. Qing Yuan could be said to be extremely innocent after being suddenly lectured by his father. He had not been slacking off recently. Why did his father suddenly give him a warning? At the same time, the city gate had been locked, but a large group of carriages arrived outside the city. They thought that it was a passing caravan that would soon turn to another place to spend the night and enter the city at dawn. Who knew that the other party would stand outside the city in a daze and have no intention of moving? The soldiers guarding the city felt that something was wrong and sent someone down to inquire. "Who are you? Where are you from?" "We're from out of town. We're here to seek refuge with our relatives." The person who replied was a servant dressed as a child. Although he spoke in Dongqing's official language, his pronunciation was stiff and it was a little difficult to listen to. When the soldier heard the other party's accent, his brows furrowed fiercely. His tone was a little forceful, and he bluntly chased them away. "Now that the city gate has been locked, if you want to enter the city, come back tomorrow." The servant smiled apologetically and handed over a money pouch filled with broken silver. "Brother, please don't be angry. It's late at night and it's really not suitable to sleep in the wild. Why don't you do us a favor and help us pass a message to our master's relative to come out?" The soldier did not dare to accept these benefits. The higher-ups were very strict in this regard. He roughly pushed the money pouch back and asked casually, "Who is your master's relative?" Chapter 8:25. Commandant Li. The soldier guarding the city glanced suspiciously at the servant and the carriages behind him. His heart wavered and he said hesitantly, "I've never heard of Commandant Li having any relatives." "Wait here for a while, I'll send someone to inform the commandant." Hearing the first sentence, the servant thought that he would be denied entry. He didn't expect the soldier to be reasonable and be willing to help run this errand. He bowed gratefully and thanked him sincerely. "Thank you, big brother." The city guard snorted softly and accepted the other party's bow. "Wait here, Commandant Li isn't someone ordinary people can meet. If you want to pass on the news, you'll have to wait for a while." The soldier guarding the city said the ugly part first to prevent unnecessary misunderstandings. The servant hurriedly said, it's all right. As long as we can meet the general, it's all right to wait a while longer." The city guarding work wasn't under Lion's jurisdiction. The soldier guarding the city could only pass on the news one level at a time. There was a long detour in the middle. By the time Lian received the news, he had already slept for a while. Relatives? As a martial artist, Lian had always maintained the habit of sleeping lightly. He would wake up the moment there was movement outside. When he heard someone pass on the news that his relatives were outside the city, he was stunned. He thought he was dreaming. Where did his relatives come from? Lian's reaction was misunderstood by his subordinate. He said angrily, "Could it be that the people below are making fun of me?" What time was it now? It was indeed a little too much to come in the middle of the night to make people sleep well. Hearing his subordinate's words, Lian waved his hand and got up to take down his outer robe from the clothes rack. He casually said, "Let's go take a look." The subordinate was stunned. Could it be that the people outside the city were really Commandant Li's relatives? It was already the middle of the night. Other than the patrolling guards, there was almost no one else. Lian rode his horse towards the city gate. When the soldier guarding the city saw Lian, he suppressed the excitement in his heart and bowed in fear and trepidation. Although Lian was a young lad, he was good-looking and good at fighting. His future was limitless. To these soldiers, they were Li Yun's fans, and Li Yun was their idol. Who wouldn't be excited to be able to talk to their idol face to face after staying at the city gate and enduring the wind and rain? Lian suddenly jumped off the horse and flung the reins. With a cold expression, he asked, "Where is he?" Jiang Pengji and the others wanted Lian to be a man of few words in front of outsiders. This was the only way to maintain his dignified demeanor. Lian deeply felt that he was right. Normally, he restrained his impulse to speak and gradually established a quiet and aloof public image. The guard hurriedly caught up with Li Yun and bowed slightly. He said respectfully, "Those people are still waiting outside the city." Li Yun took out his token and ordered, "Open the city gates." The tall and heavy city gate opened up to the width of a person, and dim candlelight seeped through the gap. Li Yun's shadow was elongated, casting a shadow on the ground. Not far away, a servant dressed as a child was looking around. When he saw Li Yun appear, his eyes lit up. His appearance, demeanor, stature. If he was thrown into a crowd, he would be the center of attention. This person was definitely the one he was looking for. To ensure Li Yun's safety, there was a troop of soldiers behind him. The servant hurried forward, but unexpectedly, he was stopped by the guards. Li Yun waved his hand and said, "No matter, let him come forward to talk." The servant felt as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water on his head. His agitated emotions calmed down a lot. Li Yun asked him, "You said that your master is my relative?" At the same time, Li Yun sized up the servant. Although he was a servant, his attire was better than that of a commoner from a wealthy family. Li Yun did not remember having such a distinguished relative. He and his honored master depended on each other on the mountain. He had not even seen his adoptive parents in name a few times. How could he be a relative? The servant was about to speak when he heard a cold snort. The voice was not loud, but it was very clear, as if it was ringing in his ear. When Lian heard this voice, his first reaction was, "This person is a master of internal martial arts." His second reaction was that he was so moved that he almost cried. "I haven't seen you for more than 2 years, my disciple is so impressive." It was clearly a reprimand, but there was an indescribable pampering and joy in the voice. Lian was so excited that he almost forgot to speak. It was only when Xie Qian finished speaking and alighted from the carriage that he came to his senses. He saw Lian stride forward and kneel on the ground with a thud. He bowed and said, "Master, your disciple is unfilial. I was unable to welcome you from afar." The person who came was none other than Lian's honored master, Xie Qian. When Xie Qian failed to assassinate the Zhongzhou Empress, he dragged his good friend, the great scholar of Zhongzhou, Wan Xian, and fled for his life. Relying on his rich experience, Xie Qian and his men avoided the imperial notice posted by the Zhongzhou imperial family and left Zhongzhou without a hitch. Just as the war in Qinzhou was heating up, Xie Qian was worried that he would be dragged into the battlefield. He had no choice but to take a detour and head straight for Wanzhou. He asked around and found out where Lian was staying. Unfortunately, by the time he rushed out of the city gates had long been locked. "Get up. How old are you now? If outsiders see you crying, it will damage your reputation." Xie Qian bent down and helped Lian up. With the light from the torch, the bystanders noticed that Lian and Xie Qian's side profile was rather similar. Lian was young and his face still looked immature. However, after several battles, he already had the demeanor of a general. Xie Qian was mature and steady. His face was angular and slightly weathered. His eyes were as calm as a pool of stagnant water, which added to his charm. As long as one wasn't blind, 9 out of 10 people would guess that the two of them were related by blood if they stood together. Lian sniffled. When he came to his senses, he revealed a bashful expression. Only then did he realize that he was being watched. At this moment, Lian noticed an unfamiliar middle-aged man standing next to his master. His temples were dyed with a few strands of gray, but he had a scholarly air about him. He had a strong smell of ink. Lian had only seen such an air in a few teachers. It was obvious that this middle-aged man wasn't an ordinary person. His family background was certainly not bad. The middle-aged man was the great scholar of Zhongzhou, Wan Xian. His courtesy name was Changzhai. He sized up Lian. Lian even obediently bowed to him and called him senior. Wan Xian nodded in satisfaction. He stroked his beard and smiled. "You have some of the elegance you had when you were young." Xie Qian was well versed in both literature and martial arts. At first glance, he looked like a lean scholar. Only when he fought did he realize that he could fight. Lian, on the other hand, did not have the air of a scholar. His figure was lean and tall. He stood there like a spear. One look and you could tell that he was a martial artist. As Wan Xian said this, Lian's eyes darted around. A question was stuck in his mouth, wanting to ask. Chapter 8:26. Could it be as Lu Shi said, that he and his master were not master and disciple, but father and son? Wan Xian also said that he resembled his master when he was young. This piqued Lian's curiosity, as if a few kittens were gently scratching him. Xie Qian sighed softly and said, "This is not the place to talk. Can we enter the city for a chat?" Lian hurriedly said, "Of course. Please follow me, master and this gentleman." After all, he was Lian's relative. Even Lian acknowledged him, so the city guards naturally had to open the city gates to let them in. The city was quiet. Occasionally, the sound of the night watchman could be heard. Lian brought him back to his mansion. Although his house was only a 2-level mansion, there were still many empty rooms. Xie Qian looked at him and felt gratified. "Looks like you've been doing well these past few years." Wanzhou was the place where the Tsing-Yi army and the Red Lotus group wreaked havoc the most. But now, the buildings in the city were lined up neatly, the streets were wide and tidy, and the air was fresh and clean. It was unlike other cities, where the streets were filled with filth and the air was filled with foul odors. Li Yan invited Xie Qian to sit in the seat of honor. His eyes were filled with admiration. Master, in the end, Li Yan was so nervous that he could not speak. It was as if thousands of flies were buzzing in his head. Xie Qian took a sip of tea and casually raised his head to look at Li Yan, who was kneeling not far away. He asked calmly, "What's the matter?" Li Yan stammered, unable to speak. After all, it was somewhat shameful to ask his master if he was his biological father. What if it was a misunderstanding? Master left a letter in the thatched cottage, saying that he wanted to seek revenge. Then, did he succeed? Li Yan cowered and changed his question at the last minute. If Li Yan dared to look up, he would have realized that Xie Qian's bearing was not something an ordinary martial artist could have. One's temperament changed one's body. That was obviously a noble bearing that could only be cultivated in a wealthy family for a long time. How was it like living in seclusion in the mountains for more than 10 years? Hearing Li Yan's question, Xie Qian's hand that was holding the tea paused. He almost spilled the tea. Xie Qian was also a martial artist. His kung fu was unusually stable. To make him make such a mistake, it was obvious how lethal Li Yan's question was. "No, I failed." Xie Qian squeezed out these words through gritted teeth. Li Yan lowered his head and asked weakly. He seemed to have accepted his fate. "Earlier, I met my lord's father, the Chongzhou magistrate, Lu Shi. He said that he and my father were childhood friends. He even said that this disciple is not only master's disciple, but also very likely to be your biological son. Master, is this true?" Xie Qian tilted his head and searched his mind for Lu Shi's face. He hadn't seen Lu Shi for many years. The impression he had of Lu Shi was still that of his youth. Li Yan saw that his master did not reply for a long time. His heart sank and almost sank to the bottom. "What do you mean by very likely?" "It's true," Xie Qian added in a slightly displeased manner. His own son had been taken in as a subordinate by his enemy's daughter, and this matter was quite stifling. More importantly, the relationship between Xie Qian and Lu Shi was not as good as the latter made it out to be. When Li Yan heard this, he suddenly raised his head in astonishment, unable to contain his joy. After a long pause, he spat out a word, "Father." Xie Qian nodded lightly. "Yes." On the other hand, Li Yan was stuck. The expected reunion between father and son was supposed to be a touching reunion. Why was it so dull? "Father, then why don't you acknowledge me as your son?" Li Yan felt a little wronged. He and his adoptive parents only met twice a year. The person he interacted with the most was Xie Qian. When he was young, he often wondered why his master was not his father. Xie Qian lowered his eyes and said, "When did I not acknowledge you?" Li Yan was stuck again. A teacher for a day, a father for life. The family spear technique needs to be passed down from master to disciple. "Since I am your master and your father, when did I not acknowledge you?" Li Yan was speechless. What he said made so much sense that he was speechless. Then this surname. Li Yan lowered his head and struggled for a while. His mood also lightened up. "Your father was chased out of the family. Naturally, your surname cannot be Xie." Xie Qian answered matter-of-factly. He continued, "In that tragic case, I brought you along and luckily escaped. In my muddle-headedness, I forgot who I was. I wandered all the way from Hejin County to Fengyi County. Later, I was taken in by the Li couple. That family had no children for many years, so they adopted you. When your father remembered who I was, you were already 2 years old." Li Yan's original name was Li Gozhu. The blood clot in Xie Qian's brain slowly subsided and he regained his memory. Suddenly, his head hurt. He, Xie Qian, was well versed in both literature and martial arts. Yet, his son had such a lowly name. However, he was too embarrassed to argue with the couple. He simply let that name be Liyun's nickname and even made the decision to give him a nice-sounding name. Yun meant that he was wealthy and well-versed in both literature and martial arts. It was much better than Gozhu. After the couple adopted Liyun, they quickly became pregnant. Naturally, they cherished their child even more and did not mind Xie Qian's actions. After listening to his explanation, Liyun did not know whether to laugh or cry. However, he quickly noticed the strangeness in Xie Qian's words. What did he mean by chased out of the family? What discord did father have with the Xie family? There were 4 noble families in Dongqing: the Feng family of Shanyang, the Wang family of Lengjie, the Xie family of Jiangning, and the Meng family of Cangzhou. Although he did not know much about the Xie family, looking at Feng Jin beside him, Liyun knew that Xie Qian, who was a direct descendant, must be very respectable. According to Lu Shi, Xie Qian was a leading figure of his generation. How did he become like this? Because of Xie Qian, Liyun specially asked Feng Jin about the Wang family of Lengjie and the Xie family of Jiangning. He discovered something strange. These 2 families seemed to have faded out of sight at the same time. Their activities in the imperial court had decreased. Xie Qian's eyes slanted and he said plainly, "You are still a child. This matter has nothing to do with you." Liyun was disheartened. He stubbornly changed the question. Then father's enemy is the person who killed Yun's mother? Who is that person? This time, Xie Qian did not avoid the question. Instead, he said, "A demon." This monstrous genius wasn't just a curse, it was a real monstrous genius. Liyun wanted to continue asking, but when he saw Xie Qian's calm face, all his courage disappeared. Then, will father still leave? Liyun's goal in life was very simple. He wanted to take care of his master, marry a wife, and have children. With his persistent efforts, he finally had a sliver of hope for the latter. If his master left, who would he take care of? "I'm not leaving." These 3 simple words were like music to Liyun's ears. "Tomorrow, introduce me to him," Xie Qian said. "Introduce? There are some things that I need to discuss with your lord. Even if I can't find Lu Shi, it will be the same if I can find his daughter." Chapter 827. Take your time, father and son. Wan Xian glanced at Liyun. His features resembled Xie Qian when he was young, but his delicate features were closer to his mother's. Thinking of this, Wan Xian could not help but sigh. If not for that incident, Xie Qian and his wife would be an enviable immortal couple. Liyun hurriedly let the servants lead the way and brought Wan Xian to the guest room. Seeing his son's busy appearance, Xie Qian smiled and said, "After 2 to 3 years, you've grown a lot." Liyun's ears perked up. His father's words were praising him for growing up and being able to take charge. Even though his heart was bursting with joy, he maintained his habitual aloofness on his face. Xie Qian changed the topic and said to Liyun, "According to tradition, marriage should have been arranged a long time ago." At this point, his brows furrowed uncontrollably. If Xie Qian had not been secretly removed from the Xie family, Liyun would have been the legitimate grandson of the Xie family. Marriage arrangements were made at the age of 13 or 14. Usually, it was chosen by the wife of the family. It's a pity that your mother passed away early. Otherwise, she would have been able to attend my first birthday banquet. The rules of aristocratic families were as numerous as the hairs on a cow. Marriage was arranged at the age of 13 or 14, and marriage at the age of 18 or 19. Considering Li Yun's age, he should have gotten married long ago and had children. The current situation was a little awkward. It felt like he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. As someone from an aristocratic family, although Xie Qian did not crazily value bloodline, he did not see himself as a commoner. When his son arranged a marriage, it was best for the bride to be of noble birth. She did not need to have a distinguished family background, but she had to be smart. The main point was, she had to be smart. It couldn't be helped, Xia Qian's nerves were strained by that strange demon. He was afraid that his son would marry the wrong wife and ruin 3 generations. Xia Qian mentioning Li Yun's birth mother calmed Li Yun's swollen mind. Ever since he was young, he had never heard Xia Qian talk about his birth mother. Li Yun asked carefully, "Father, I heard from Governor Lu that my mother was from the Langia Wang family?" Both parents were direct descendants of the 4 noble families. In this era where bloodlines were important, Li Yun's birth was even nobler than the royal family. Xia Qian sighed and said with a look of reminiscence, "Yes, your mother's surname is Wang, and her maiden name is Huiyun. She is the legitimate daughter of the Wang family of Langia. She and the current family master of the Wang family are siblings. Unfortunately, the heavens didn't help anyone. Her body was delicate, and she unfortunately died of a hemorrhage when she gave birth to you." Li Yun listened attentively. When he heard Xia Qian say his mother's maiden name, Huiyun, his eyelids twitched. Xia Qian didn't miss his son's reaction and asked, "What's wrong?" Li Yun shook his head, "No, I just feel that the name mother is similar to a lady I know." Not to mention similar names, there were many people with the same name in the world. Xia Qian did not care. Li Yun asked again, "Mother. I heard from Governor Lu that she is a rare talented woman." Xia Qian said proudly, "She's not just a talented woman. Using Lu Shi as an analogy, your mother's talent is more than enough to crush Lu Shi." Li Yun, "Father, how deep is the enmity between you and Lu Province's governor?" However, after hearing Xia Qian's words, Li Yun also felt a sense of admiration for his mother, whom he had never met. He was also a little depressed. According to his father, his mother died giving birth to him. "Father, do you have a portrait of my mother?" Li Yun heard from Lu Shi that Xia Qian was an all-rounder with both pen and sword. He could recite poems and paint with a brush, and he could kill enemies with a spear. If that was the case, his father should have drawn something like a portrait of his mother as a memento, right? "Of course I do." Xia Qian had been a mountain otaku for more than 10 years. If it were anyone else, they would probably have degenerated into a slovenly Jianghu man. However, Xia Qian's upbringing was ingrained in his bones. Even if he only lived in a thatched hut, he could still create a dissolute and unrestrained demeanor of a hermit. As a single father who raised his son to make a living, he did not neglect his other skills. His brush and ink were still outstanding. To prevent his memory from fading, he drew several portraits and carried them with him. Li Yunxing hurriedly opened the portrait. When he saw the person's face, he was instantly stunned. If he was not sure that Lady Hui Jun was younger than him by a few months, he would have suspected that she was his mother. "Isn't this Lady Hui?" he muttered as his forehead was hit. How rude. He did not call her mother, but Lady Hui. Was this fellow rebelling? Li Yun hesitated for a while and said honestly, "Father, I have seen the person in the portrait." Xia Qian's heart jumped to his throat. His son had seen that evildoer? "When did you see her?" "Yesterday." Li Yun explained, "There is a lady in the Lord's backyard. She looks similar to the mother in the portrait, but her temperament is very different." The Wang Huiyun in the portrait had a temperament like an orchid, elegant and refined. She wore a luxurious dress and stood among the flowers. Her right hand was placed on her slightly protruding abdomen. There was a faint smile on her face. Her entire person was shrouded in the halo of maternal love. When people saw the portrait, they were first attracted by her temperament, then they noticed her appearance. Even through the portrait, they could guess that this was a talented woman who had read extensively. Only by immersing herself in this field for a long time could one cultivate such a temperament. As for Lady Hui, who Li Yun had seen before, she was also a beauty beyond compare. However, that kind of beauty was dazzling and dazzling. One was reserved, the other was flamboyant. Hearing Li Yun's words, Xia Qian immediately became vigilant towards the woman who looked like his wife. Without waiting for Xie Qian to regain his senses, Li Yun carefully kept the portrait and said shyly, "Father, what is it?" "Your son has a woman that he admires." Li Yun did not want his father to decide on his engagement. It would be better for him to confess now to avoid unnecessary trouble. Xie Qian was speechless. Although he had unwillingly lowered his standards for choosing a wife, Xie Qian really did not want his son to marry an illiterate, vulgar woman from the mountains. Xie Qian immediately pictured in his mind a woman with a mouth full of yellow teeth, spittle flying everywhere as she spoke, black dirt hidden under her nails, noisy eating, snoring like thunder in her sleep, scolding and scuffling with others. His vision darkened and he almost stopped breathing. "Son, don't take things too hard." Xie Qian's heart trembled as he asked, "Which family is it?" He did not care if it was a free love, he just wanted to know which family it was. Even if it was a peasant girl, he would accept it. He only hoped that his upbringing was not wrong. "Hejian's Shengguan family, I wonder if father has heard of it?" Li Yun said a little embarrassedly, "Her name is Shengguan Wan." Hejian's Shengguan family? Xie Qian knew this. He had already prepared for the worst but did not expect Li Yun to give him a surprise. "The wife of the Shengguan family is not bad. Does that mean father agrees?" Chapter 828. Xie Qian's face darkened as he reprimanded his son. A marriage contract is a bond between two families. How can it be so casual? Parents could turn a blind eye to the fact that they had feelings for each other before marriage, but the marriage rules couldn't be messed around. Li Yun was like a frosted eggplant. His heart that had flown high up in the sky fell to the ground again. "What do you mean, father?" "Of course it's a serious discussion about marriage. We'll invite Iceman to be the matchmaker. Everything will be ready." Li Yun thought of Shengguan Wan's situation and said with a headache, "I'm afraid that won't work." "Why not?" Wan escaped from her ex-husband's house. Her maiden home is controlled by her stepmother. If Wan goes back, she will not be able to return. Xie Qian was speechless. He was dumbfounded by his son's successive landmines. Could he tell her all the scares at once? Xie Qian did not mind Wan's second marriage. He was just a little worried, escaped from her husband's house. "What do you mean? Could it be that she is still engaged?" Seducing a married woman, was his son asking for a beating? Li Yun shook his head like a rattle drum and hurriedly explained, Wan and her ex-husband were indeed engaged, but before she could marry into the family, she died. That in-law's family was extremely harsh. They did not let it go and forced Wan to be a widow, almost causing Wan to die. Her husband is dead, so Wan should be free. I admire her, but I also want to tell father about this. It's a clear path. After all, he was still a naive young man. Li Yun's face was already red before he finished speaking. If father insists on proposing marriage to Iceman, you can mention it directly to the Lord. Xie Qian's emotions fluctuated. He asked doubtfully, "What does this have to do with your lord?" "The Lord and Wan are like siblings." "No, like sisters. Now Wan has no one to rely on. Only the Lord is her family." Xie Qian was speechless. Although his own pig finally knew how to woo cabbages, his son's brain was a little slow. Seeing Li Yun's sparkling eyes, Xie Qian felt tired and could only nod in agreement. "Deal. Tell your lord about this in detail tomorrow." Li Yun heaved a long sigh of relief. He was so excited that he couldn't sleep the entire night. The next day, he woke up on time to practice his spear dance. He instructed the servants to pay attention to Xie Qian and Wan Xian's movements and immediately prepare breakfast. Don't assume that Li Yun was very dedicated to his work and went to work early in the morning. He had only taken a detour to intercept Shengguan Wan. Li Yun leaped up. Relying on his height, he easily reached the top of the wall and called out to the courtyard. Shengguan Wan was not the first to notice Li Yun. Instead, it was the urchin who was studying below who noticed him. Seeing the familiar person lying on the wall of the courtyard, the urchins all looked at Shang Wanwan with smiles. Shang Wanwan blushed in annoyance and placed the bamboo slips on the table while the group of radishes burst into laughter. Everyone, write down the words on the board. We'll check it later. There was a simple blackboard and chalk in the courtyard. The blackboard was just a piece of board that was painted black. The so-called chalk was actually chalk, a type of limestone. When the iron mines in Xiangyang district were mined, they could be made into chalk. Before this, no one had thought of using this white material to write and teach. It was the Lord who was clever and good at making use of it. What are you doing here again? Lian took something out and said to her, I passed by here and brought you some breakfast. Shang Wanwan took it and realized that Lian was still looking at her with a burning gaze. She felt a little shy. Still looking? Shang Wanwan said angrily, when are you coming over? Why must you let the students watch a joke? Lian scratched his head and said uneasily, isn't this too happy? My father came last night. Master is really my father. Shang Wanwan was shocked. Seeing Lian's rosy face, she felt a little nervous. You idiot. Did you tell your father about us? Of course he did. Lian added, Father said that he would discuss this matter in detail with the Lord today. Shang Wanwan wished she could crush Lian like a bun in her hand. How could marriage be a child's play? At least let her be mentally prepared. You're not willing? Lian looked at her expression carefully. He thought of the day of his triumphant return, when threw a sachet to the Lord and didn't even look at him. His heart felt so suffocated that it was indescribable. Shang Wanwan snorted softly and said in a low voice, You didn't even discuss such an important matter with me. Lian felt wronged too. He hung his head and said, But already agreed. He even secretly held her little hand with Shang Wanwan's tacit consent. Times have changed. An ugly daughter-in-law would have to meet her in-laws sooner or later, but she had to be allowed to dress up and be mentally prepared. Shang Wanwan's heart softened when she saw Lian's dejected expression. Forget it, what's the use of saying this now? I don't blame you. Shang Wanwan said, It's getting late. Go to the military camp early and don't delay. As for the marriage proposal, if Lanting agrees, I'll agree. Shang Wanwan's cheeks blushed. Without waiting for Lian to come back to his senses, she had already gone to the corner door and slammed it shut. Lian was left standing on the spot, laughing uncontrollably. Although Shang Wanwan was married, she was a widow. She didn't even have a fire-repelling painting as her dowry. She was as clean as a blank piece of paper when it came to matters between men and women. Her previous marriage made her disheartened. It was at this time that Lian rashly barged into her life. She wanted to learn martial arts to kill the enemy, so Jiang Pengji sent Lian to give her special lessons. Unexpectedly, after a while, she was moved by this innocent youth. At first, Shang Wanwan had no intention of remarrying, but if it was Lian, she really couldn't refuse. Lian introduced Xie Qian to Jiang Pengji. He was more attentive than Xie Qian himself. When Jiang Pengji found out about this, she couldn't help but be stunned. She didn't expect Xie Qian to appear there. She bowed to Xie Qian as a junior. I've often heard my father talk about you. Now that I've met you, I realize that my father's words can't describe you at all. Xie Qian had the elegance of a scholar and the heroic bearing of a general. Looking at him, it was as if she could picture a middle-aged version of Lian in her mind. Jiang Pengji had a sweet tongue, but Xie Qian didn't expose her lies. Would Lu Shi often mention him to his daughter? She wouldn't even dare to do so in her daydreams. Lu Zhongqing's daughter is indeed extraordinary. Xie Qian didn't mince words and went straight to the point. If I'm not wrong, Lu Shi should have told you about my purpose in going to Zhongzhou. Jiang Pengji nodded. He said it was to assassinate an enemy. Did Uncle Xie succeed? Chapter 829. Evildoer. Jiang Pengji's gaze shifted and she secretly clenched her right hand. Her tone was filled with murderous intent. I heard my father mention that evildoer. It was said that she was the culprit behind my mother's death. However, she was omnipotent and had extraordinary abilities. My father couldn't do anything to her. Xie Qian had been observing Jiang Pengji's reaction. Seeing her reaction, he knew that she knew a lot of inside information. She was a big-hearted person. He told such an important matter to his child. Wasn't he afraid that his child would do something stupid out of impulse? Xie Qian did not tell Li Yun the truth about his mother's death. He was actually afraid that his child would do something stupid out of impulse. That evildoer was not simple. Even the master said, an ordinary human body could not hurt the evildoer at all. To put it bluntly, going there would be suicide. Rather than saying that she has omnipotent abilities, it's better to say that the person she hooked up with is powerful. Xie Qian sneered mockingly. His eyes were filled with obvious disgust and contempt. He continued, perhaps no one in the world can compare to her in terms of seducing the master. Jiang Pengji nodded in agreement. She smiled and said, since ancient times, heroes have a weakness for the charms of beauties. Even heroes among men are like this, let alone those ordinary people who are controlled by their bodies. I'm just a little curious. My father said that the evildoer has evil methods that are beyond imagination. She is comparable to Daji, who seduces the master. Why didn't any master teach her a lesson? From the information obtained so far, it was known that there were no immortal techniques in this world, but there were methods beyond imagination. For example, Monk Liaochen of the Hejian Buddhist temple. He could read one's face and know one's fate. Xie Qian frowned. Jiang Pengji's question was one that he could not understand. All these years, I have secretly visited many hermits and masters. I know some inside information. Xie Qian said, that year, when I found out that my wife's body was possessed by this evildoer, I immediately thought of the ancient fox demon who possessed Su Daji. Before that, I didn't believe in deceiving gods. But facing my wife who was completely unfamiliar, I had to believe in her. I had no choice but to secretly seek help from a master. Xie Qian sought help from Monk Liaochen of Hejian. Unfortunately, the news was leaked and the evildoer was alarmed. I heard father say that you're looking for Master Liaochen. Xie Qian nodded with a bitter smile, yes, Master Liaochen. Unfortunately, before he could even see Master Liaochen, the evildoer had already discovered his intentions. The evildoer took the opportunity to ambush him and heavily injured him. Later, he encountered bandits who wanted to kill him. Xie Qian had no choice but to risk his life and jump off the cliff with his infant son. Fortunately, he won the bet, and the vines and branches on the cliff side saved his and his son's lives. Jiang Pengji's streaming room was still open. When Xie Qian first appeared, many viewers expressed that the uncle was really charming. Everyone was silently praising the uncle's looks. When they heard the conversation between the two, the bullet screen on the live broadcast screen changed in unison. Atlantis, does old handsome Xie Qian mean that he found out that his wife has been transmigrated? You are amazing, my ancient people. Izhan Mingming, that's normal, right? After all, they were partners sharing the same bed. How could he not notice? Yan Rian, I'm a little confused. Who can explain what's going on? Zeshou Chojo, do you remember that there's a transmigrator in the host's world? According to the content of the previous live broadcast, this transmigrator took over Xie Qian's wife's body and was later discovered by Xie Qian. The transmigrator took the initiative to kill Xie Qian's infant son, Han Mei. Xie Qian and his son were lucky enough to survive. Of course, they would think of a way to take revenge. Kumo lemonade, this. Transmigrating isn't something that the person can control, right? But that transmigrator is really too much. Not only did she take over the body of someone else's wife, she also wanted to kill the husband and son of this body. But Xie Qian also wanted to kill the transmigrator. If I were a transmigrator, I'd rather live than die. Even though I feel guilty, everyone wants to live, right? Liangpin Puzi, I don't think this matter can be put into the same category. Everyone wants to live, but what the transmigrator did was really too much. According to what we know, not only did this transmigrator want to kill Xie Qian and his son, but she also killed the host's mother and her first 2 brothers. Remember Lu Huan, the illegitimate daughter of the Lu family? According to the analysis of the gods, Lu Huan is the daughter of the transmigrator and Prince Changsho. Remember Lu Huan's husband, Wu Majun is the son of the transmigrator and the emperor of Dongqing. Most importantly, these 2 half-siblings were born from Xie Qian's wife, Wang Huayin's body. No one would be able to accept such a thing, right? The bullet screamed disgust intensely. Many of the audience thought of the transmigrator who tried to assassinate Jiang Pengji and shuddered. From the perspective of Xie Qian and the original body, Wang Huiyun, the transmigrator took over someone else's body and used it to try to kill the original body's beloved husband and son. She also used this body to entangle with countless men and gave birth to 2 bastards. Who wouldn't feel disgusted? Xie Qian didn't know that the audience was discussing this matter. He said, I originally wanted to seek help from Master Liaochen, but the demon was too powerful and saw through my plan. Later, I met another expert by chance. He told me that the demon had an extraordinary background. I'm afraid he's from another world and can disturb the predetermined fate. He also said that many experts have noticed something strange, but the demon has strange supernatural powers and is good at hiding his whereabouts. If he hasn't matured, we can try. But so many years have passed and he has matured. It's hard to get rid of him. The experts in this world were just more powerful charlatans. They could pinch and calculate, but they couldn't fight. The transmigrator's fate was not in this world. They couldn't calculate the person's fate, let alone find her. Someone from another world? Xie Qian sighed. Yes, someone from another world might be a demon that harms people. Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes and found something strange. She knew the general location of the transmigrator because he had power and influence. He could send people to help him investigate. Xie Qian was a loner, powerless, and removed from the Xie family. How could he be so sure that the transmigrator was in the Zhongzhou palace? I have a question. How did you know that the demon was in the Zhongzhou palace? Did an expert tell you that? The expert didn't tell me, but he gave me this. Xie Qian took something out of his pocket. It was a jade pendant in the shape of a yin-yang fish. Jiang Pengji stepped forward to take it. It was the size of a palm and felt warm to the touch. The texture was smooth and delicate. It was a rare warm jade. The jade pendant was very strange. It was half black and half white. The black was pure and the white was translucent. What is this? The stars of last night, maybe there's not only a magical spiritual spring, but also an even more magical spiritual field. We can have fun on a farm. Sui Feng Xiaoxi, ha ha ha, maybe there is not only a spiritual field, but also a small farmhouse with countless cultivation methods. Autumn water, in order not to break the formation, let me say this too. Maybe there's not only a farmhouse, but also an old grandpa. Jiang Pengji was speechless. Salted fish were indeed salted fish. They were a bunch of people who didn't mind stirring up trouble. She ignored the idle audience and asked Xie Qian, how do I use it? Just wear it by your side every day. Xie Qian said, an expert once said that if a person with a strong soul is born with the ability to communicate with the spiritual jade, their dreams will be clearer. If it's an ordinary person, they can only increase the amount of time they have contact with the spiritual jade. After constant practice, they can enter the dream and communicate with the spirit. It all depends on the person's talent. Jiang Pengji looked at the jade pendant in her hand and frowned. She had a feeling that she had seen this thing before. Xie Qian also noticed Jiang Pengji's strangeness. He asked casually, "What did you find?" Jiang Pengji said, "Can you lend this treasure to me for a while? I don't know why, but when I see it, I have an illusion that it looks familiar, as if I've seen it somewhere before. But I can't remember at the moment. I wonder if you can agree to it." For Xie Qian, this jade pendant was his lifeblood. If he lost it, he would never be able to find the demon's whereabouts, let alone seek revenge. But during the previous assassination, he realized that he was just a mortal. There was no way he could compete with the demon. He needed the power of a mortal. If not for that, Xie Qian would not have brought Wan Xian all the way to Wanzhou. If Jiang Pengji wanted to lend it to him, he naturally would not refuse. Xie Qian nodded in agreement. Jiang Pengji hurriedly said, "I'll borrow it for 2 days. I'll definitely return it after some time." After that, Xie Qian mentioned Li Yun and Shang Guanwan's marriage. His son was not young anymore. It was not easy for him to win over a cabbage. As a father, he had to assist him. With Li Yun's current awkward status, it was great luck to be able to marry Shang Guanwan, the daughter of a noble family. I have no opinion on this matter. The key is Wan Er's attitude. You should have heard from Han Mei about Wan Er's past. It wasn't her fault. In all fairness, Wan Er and Han Mei are a good match. The two of them love each other. It would be best if they could get married. In front of the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women, a good woman should not marry a second time. Even if a woman's husband died before she married, a woman should be widowed for a husband she had never met. Xie Qian was not so pedantic. In fact, he scoffed at most of the contents of the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women. Not to mention second marriages, there were many women who married 2 or 3 times among the gentry. They only looked at the match and bloodline. They did not care about anything else. In fact, Shang Guanwan's status as a widow was nothing to Xie Qian. What kind of past is that? Why are those idiots making a fuss about being a widow? Why don't they take a look at themselves? Xie Qian's eyes were full of disdain. If you say so, I feel more at ease. When Xie Qian came out of the district headquarters, he saw his son looking around from afar. He looked as stupid as he could be. "Father," Xie Qian pretended not to know him and walked past his son. Li Yun was depressed. He only wanted to know if the Lord had agreed to his marriage with Wan Er. In another room, Jiang Pengji was lost in thought as she looked at the Yinyang jade pendant on the table. She searched her memory seriously. Based on her experience, it was impossible for her to have seen such an item, but the sense of familiarity lingered. Jiang Pengji held the jade pendant and closed her eyes in deep thought. She wanted to use her mental energy to explore the material of the jade pendant. It was at this moment that an invisible cyclone appeared on the surface of the jade pendant. A weak suction attracted her attention. She closed her eyes and calmed her mind. She took the opportunity to inject her mental energy into the pendant. Suddenly, the originally dark field of vision suddenly brightened. It was the high sky covered by clouds and mist. She was stunned for a moment. She realized that a red line extended all the way to the bottom of the clouds. With a thought, she felt an illusion of weightlessness. Her line of sight followed the red line and pulled closer to the ground. Seeing that she was about to hit the ground, she suddenly opened her eyes. The feeling of weightlessness suddenly disappeared. When Jiang Pengji revealed the answer, the audience was in an uproar, then they were deeply disappointed. They had thought that they could cultivate and didn't expect such an answer. Drunken Cloud Cat Demon, disappointed. He was exceptionally disappointed. If it was just a piece of ore, it would be meaningless. Regardless of whether it was ancient times, modern times, or the interstellar era, they were all essentially the same dimensional world. The only difference between the three was the time axis. If they were to vigorously promote the development of science and technology, Even the most backward era would enter the interstellar era. This was the inevitable outcome of the development of science and technology. The ores on Earth would be considered interstellar ores on other planets, wouldn't they? If that's the case, there's nothing special about the yin-yang jade pendant in the host's hand. Many of the audience expressed their disappointment, but a small number of people noticed the details of Jiang Pengji's words. She said that this interstellar ore was extremely rare even in her world. This was thought-provoking. In the interstellar era, there were tens of thousands of habitable planets. What they lacked the least was all kinds of energy. Under such circumstances, for Jiang Pengji to describe it as rare and precious, it was definitely a priceless treasure. Many people thought of this, and their extinguished curiosity was rekindled. Fried egg Cheng, streamer, what special use does this interstellar ore have? Jiang Pengji flipped the yin-yang jade pendant left and right, a light smile on her face. Because there was no one around, Jiang Pengji wasn't afraid of being heard. She opened her mouth and said, "Special use, I'm afraid I'll scare you if I tell you." According to the records of the Interstellar Federation, a new intelligent race will be discovered every 7 interstellar days. There are many forms of intelligent races. The most common creatures are those that are made up of cells, and the rarest are those that are pure energy bodies or spiritual bodies. Regardless of whether they are pure energy bodies or spiritual bodies, their life structure is not stable. Most of them can only survive in a specific environment. A small number of them can rely on special substances or mediums to leave their original ecological environment. This special substance is the ore in my hand. Can you guess its value? Jiang Pengji rarely talked about her past, so naturally, the audience didn't want to miss it. Awesome Wadagu, streamer, don't keep us in suspense, I'm dying of anxiety. Tian Shou ba, how much value can such a small thing have? Is it possible to buy an entire Earth? Some of the audience couldn't wait to urge her, while others laughed and teased her. Jiang Pengji laughed and said, an ore the size of a fingernail can buy one or even several ore planets. Do you think it's valuable? This thing is the most important cornerstone of the central hub of the Sky Brain. With it, the Sky Brain network can be realized in a real sense. You won't understand even if I tell you all this, you just need to know that it's very powerful. Unfortunately, it's a waste of God's gift now. Such a powerful thing, if it was placed in the right era, could be used to its greatest potential and create endless wealth. But now? It can only be treated as an ordinary accessory. Jiang Pengji was once one of the people with the highest authority in the Federation. In other words, her authority in the Sky Brain was second only to the Commander-in-Chief of the Federation. Many highly classified information that ordinary people couldn't come into contact with was completely open to her. She had interacted with the Sky Brain before, so she knew that the Sky Brain wasn't complicated data, but a living body. To be precise, the Sky Brain should be a virtual creature that was a combination of pure energy and spirit. This was very similar to a creature like the system. Speaking of which, it was strange. Even the Sky Brain couldn't completely leave its host, so how did the system do it? Was it purely dependent on the host? But the host was just an ordinary human. In theory, it wasn't enough to become the host of a virtual creature. Jiang Pengji touched the yin-yang jade pendant in her hand, her expression revealing some suspicion. But very quickly, she threw this question to the back of her mind. At that moment, the live stream room had already exploded. Such a small thing was worth who knew how many Earths. Was she kidding them? Why would Jiang Pengji have the leisure to tease them? Chapter 832. Catch a rat? Catch what rat? The audience was confused. Did a rat break into the streamer's room and eat her supper? Jiang Pengji didn't explain further. She put away the yin-yang jade pendant and, for the first time, asked for leave from the audience and turned off the stream. It was not convenient for the audience to see what happened next. After that, Jiang Pengji found a quiet place and poked the system. I know you're still alive. Don't play dead. You saw what happened just now. Is there anything you want to say? After Jiang Pengji finished speaking, she didn't hear anything else. If she wasn't sure that the system was still locked up, she might have suspected that the system had run away. Squeak if you don't want to die. We're already at this point. What else can you do? With the appearance of the Yin Yang Jade pendant, Jiang Pengji had more information on the system. Jiang Pengji said bluntly. The system could only speak unwillingly. Squeak. Faced with the system's malicious act of cuteness, Jiang Pengji curled her lips and said, I'll give you half an hour to be honest. The system snorted fiercely and said with disdain, what honesty? You're still too young to fool me. Ever since they parted on bad terms, the system and Jiang Pengji hadn't talked anymore. The system knew that every time Jiang Pengji looked for it, nothing good would come out of it. It must have had 8 lifetimes of bad luck to have met such a host. Can you tell me where your core carrier is? Jiang Pengji asked it with a smile. Her tone was casual, as if she was just asking about the weather. The system secretly spat on the inside, but it said, aren't you my host? Don't play dumb. You know what core carrier I'm talking about. Jiang Pengji changed her style of communication when she realized that harmonious communication wasn't possible. After seeing the Yin Yang Jade pendant, I remembered that you're a system and a virtual being. Logically speaking, virtual beings can't leave their original environment without a special carrier. Even the sky brain can't avoid this. You're the same. Hearing Jiang Pengji compare it to the sky brain, the system almost exploded in anger. Major General, I don't have that kind of thing at all. You should just give up. It was a system that had the ability to travel between different planes. It was a true high-level life form. How could a mere heavenly brain compare to it? Jiang Pengji saw that the system refused to pay up. She sneered and asked, you don't feel guilty for saying that? The system's heart skipped a beat. On the surface, it still stuck to its original words and refused to be coaxed by Jiang Pengji. Fine, 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 since you insist on not having a carrier core, I won't force you. But I have a question that I'm very curious about. I don't know if you can answer it. How do you shoot live broadcasts? Or rather, where was the camera used for the live stream? Jiang Pengji closed her eyes again and used her spirit to probe the Yin Yang Jade pendant according to the previous steps. Soon, she discovered a strange cyclone. In layman's terms, the Yin Yang Jade pendant was actually a terminal and login port for the spiritual network. Only when one's spirit was strong enough could they log into the spiritual network. Ordinary people didn't have a strong mental brain. They could only increase the time they spent with the jade pendant and passively adapt. The so-called psychic dream was actually entering the spiritual network in an unconscious state. But Jiang Pengji was different. When the cyclone appeared, she didn't resist. She let the cyclone pull her spirit into it. Because she was mentally prepared, she wasn't surprised when the sky and clouds appeared in front of her. Instead, she followed the red line and fell to the ground. Not long after, the scenery on the ground kept magnifying in front of her. She saw an old friend. This old friend, that she hadn't seen for a long time, was none other than the transmigrator who had sneaked into Wanzhou. She had changed her face again. She had disguised herself as a young woman who had escaped and blended in with a group of refugees. Jiang Pengji could clearly see what was happening on the ground and hear their voices, but the people on the ground were completely unaware. She focused her attention on the young woman. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.